When had I a choice to be other than I was? The question has followed me through every season of my life, as constant as my own shadow. Should I have been more willful, more defiant, less eager to please? Or was I shaped entirely by the expectations placed upon me before I even understood their meaning? I write now as death draws near, my body weakened, but my mind still restless. I write for my children, though I do not know whether they will read my words with kindness or condemnation. I hope only that they may understand how a life may be guided, sometimes gently, sometimes ruthlessly, by forces beyond one's choosing. I was born into a world that allowed a woman only a few acceptable roles: a daughter, obedient and modest; a wife, dutiful and fruitful; a widow, restrained and pious. I have been all three, and more than that, I have been something for which there is no comfortable place in polite society. Yet I did not begin in scandal. I began as any respectable merchant's daughter might, in a household governed by discipline, ambition, and quiet calculation. Our parish church of St. Antonin stood on Watling Street, not far from St. Paul's in London. During the week it was a place of solemn devotion. The chantry priests murmured their endless prayers for the souls of the dead, supported by the generous bequests of wealthy merchants who feared for their salvation. The air within was thick with incense and whispered supplication. I loved that place. It was the only space where I might go unaccompanied, where I could sit alone and feel, for a time, unobserved. I believed then that faith and obedience would shield me from all harm. I was naive enough to think that if I followed the rules, the world would be kind. But Sundays revealed another purpose for the church. On those days, the nave filled with families dressed in their finest garments, silks and wools, furs and jewels, all displayed as carefully as the goods in my father's undercroft. It was not only a gathering for prayer, but a marketplace of a different sort. Alliances were measured, reputations assessed, futures quietly negotiated. I had not paid attention to this as a child, but I could not ignore it once I became part of it. The autumn after my 13th birthday marked the beginning. I had long known that I would be married. No one had ever suggested otherwise. My father was a prosperous merchant, dealing in fine cloth and jewels, and my marriage was to be another transaction, one that would strengthen his standing and secure the family's future. I did not resent this. I had been raised to expect it, and in truth, I looked forward to it. Marriage, I believed, would be the beginning of my life, not its end. When my monthly courses began, I understood that change would follow swiftly. Yet even so, I was unprepared for how quickly my mother acted. "You shall not return to the grammar school," she informed me one morning, her voice as cold as ever. There is no longer any need. There was no argument to be made. My mother did not waste words, nor did she tolerate resistance. Whatever affection she possessed was reserved for my elder brother, John. The rest of us were managed, not cherished. Nan, our nurse, had provided what warmth my mother withheld. It was she who comforted me, who saw to our needs with genuine care. Without her, my childhood would have been a far colder thing. My father, in his way, was kinder. He had insisted on my education and, in secret, taught me the intricacies of his trade. I would listen from behind a curtain as he bargained with customers, later discussing his strategies with him. Those moments felt like a shared secret, a small rebellion against the narrow expectations placed upon me. I even shared my thoughts, once, with my closest companion, Geoffrey Chaucer. But he had since been sent away, and whatever childish hopes I might have entertained vanished with his departure. The Sunday my life began to change arrived without ceremony, though the household felt the weight of it from the moment we woke. My gown had been altered from one of my mother's cast-offs, fine escarlate wool, dyed a deep azure, with a green surcoat. Unlike before, it had been fitted closely to my body. I scarcely recognized myself. Nan dressed me with trembling hands. When she finished and stepped back, Her eyes filled with tears. "You will be married soon," she said, "and I shall lose you." I embraced her, promising what I could not truly guarantee, that I would not forget her. But even then, I sensed that something was ending. When I entered the hall, my brother John stared at me as though I were a stranger. My father, too, seemed unsettled, though he attempted to mask it with encouragement. My mother's reaction was sharper. She examined me with a critical eye, finding fault even where there was none. Her dissatisfaction was familiar, yet it stung more deeply that day. It was my little sister Mary who saved me. Her admiration was simple and sincere. "You are so beautiful," she said, and for a moment I believed it without fear. We walked together to church, her small hand in mine. The morning was damp with mist, the air cool and quiet. I wished the walk would never end. Inside the church, everything changed. I felt the gaze of others upon me, measuring, assessing. My heart beat so loudly I thought it might betray me. Then I saw him. Janin Perers. He was older, much older than I, but handsome in a way that commanded attention. His manner was confident, his voice warm. When he spoke to me, when he took my hand and kissed it, I felt a flush rise through me that I could neither control nor fully understand. For a moment, I felt chosen, but my mother's reaction was swift and furious. Though she tried to conceal it, I saw her anger, felt its sharp edge. I did not yet understand its cause. After Mass, families approached us. Introductions were made, polite conversations exchanged, yet my thoughts remained fixed on Janin. That afternoon, he dined with us. I was expected to act as mistress in my mother's absence, a role for which I felt entirely unprepared. The meal was strained, the atmosphere uneasy, yet Janin himself was at ease, speaking with charm and ease of his travels. He paid me particular attention, asking my preferences, listening closely to my answers. At times, his gaze lingered in a way that made me both uneasy and exhilarated. When he took my hands as he departed, his words unsettled me. "I believe you have stolen my heart," he said. I did not know whether to be frightened or pleased. Days passed in tension. My mother withdrew, my father avoided the subject, and I found myself caught between childhood and something I did not yet understand. Then, at last, my father called me to the Undercroft. Janin was there. The moment I saw him again, I knew that whatever doubts I had would not save me. He asked for my hand. My father told me that I must answer. I was not ready. Questions filled my mind. Questions about marriage, about love, about what would become of me. But there was no space to ask them. So I did what I had always done. I obeyed. "If you wish it, father," I said, "I will be his wife." The relief in the room was immediate. My fate, it seemed, had been decided long before I spoke. Janin kissed me then, truly kissed me, and something within me awakened. It was not only sweetness I felt, but something deeper, more dangerous. That night, I lay awake, unable to reconcile my dreams with the reality before me. In the days that followed, secrecy and tension only grew. My mother's anger remained unexplained, my father's insistence unyielding. Yet when Janin stood beside me again, when he spoke my name as though it mattered above all others, I felt my resistance weaken. Thus began my life as a woman. Thus began the path that would lead me far from the girl I had once been. And still, even now, I ask myself, when had I a choice to be other than I was? Chapter 2. I had wickedly prayed that mother would refuse the Perers' invitation, but when I came down from Nan's careful ministrations, I found her already waiting in the hall, dressed more magnificently than I had seen her in months. Her gown shimmered with restrained elegance, her cloak lined with costly fur, and beside her, my own best gown, now hanging loosely on my thinner frame, felt almost plain. Almost. Still, I asked, though I expected no true answer, how old she had been when she wed father. "I was too young," she said quietly, without looking at me. The words lingered between us, strange and unsettling. For a moment she met my eyes. "Do you think you are ready to be a wife, Alice?" "How would I know, Mother?" She did not respond. Father had entered, and at once the fragile moment broke. "She is ready, Marjorie," he said, as though that settled all. Mother's lips thinned. What would a man know of that? Father ignored her tone and led me out with a firm but gentle hand, speaking cheerfully of the Pereira's home, of its grandeur, of the life that awaited me there. Yet it was not the promise of a fine house that stirred my heart. It was his words, "When you are wed." The Pereira's home exceeded anything I had imagined. Situated closer to London Bridge, in a neighborhood of wealth and influence, it seemed less a house than a world unto itself. Dame Tomasa greeted us at the door, something my mother would never do, and embraced me warmly, calling me daughter before I had even crossed the threshold. Inside, I was dazzled. Light poured from lamps and sconces, reflecting off rich fabrics, embroidered hangings, painted cloths. Every surface seemed adorned. The colors, the textures, the abundance, it overwhelmed me. I felt as though I had stepped into a dream, or perhaps into a life not meant for me. Then I saw Janin. He came toward me with quiet confidence, took my hands, kissed them, and called me his beloved. My heart leapt and faltered all at once. I wanted, strangely, suddenly, to be gathered into his arms as his mother had gathered me, but propriety held us apart. I watched, carefully, how he greeted my parents. My father was stiff with tension, my mother pale and guarded. Janin bowed to her with formal respect, never meeting her eyes, and turned warmly to my father. There was ease between them that did not exist between him and my mother. Something unspoken lay there, and I felt it without understanding. Soon we were guided toward a table laden with food, but before the meal began, Janin quietly suggested we walk in the garden. I agreed at once. The courtyard beyond the hall was as beautiful as anything within. Blossoms overflowed their beds, climbing vines twisted around arbors, and the air was fragrant with roses and unfamiliar flowers. It felt like stepping into a softer, more private world. We sat beneath an apple tree. "I am as ill at ease as you are," he said after a moment. I was startled and relieved. "It feels as if everyone watches us," I admitted. We laughed softly, sharing that small honesty. Then his tone changed. "You know I was married before." "Yes," I said. He studied me closely, as though searching for doubt or fear. "I begin anew with you, Alice. You must shape our home as you wish it. I want you to be happy." His words should have reassured me, yet they filled me with quiet panic. I knew nothing of shaping a home, of choosing furnishings, of managing such a life. Instead, I seized on a safer question. "You said homes?" He smiled, pleased. "One in the city, one in the country. You shall see both. The country, horses, travel, a life beyond the city walls." For the first time, marriage felt like something more than duty. It felt like adventure. We spoke of riding, though I had never sat a horse. He promised lessons, a gentle mare, patience. He spoke as though all these things were already mine, as though I were already his. That thought stirred both delight and unease within me. The meal that followed was warm and lively. Dame Tomasa treated me with a kindness I had never known from my own mother. Master Martin was jovial, welcoming. Even my brother teased me, though without malice. Only my mother remained distant, but I did not let her shadow spoil the day. When we departed, Janin kissed my hands again, and I felt as though I walked home on air. The next morning, he took me to see the mare. She was gentle, curious, and under his guidance I dared to touch her, to trust her. For a brief moment, he lifted me onto her back, and the world shifted beneath me. When he lowered me again, his lips brushed my cheek. The touch lingered long after. Yet the moment I returned home, Mother's silence crushed that joy. She would not speak to me, would not acknowledge me. as though I had ceased to exist, and father did nothing. Days later, the truth of my departure came. I was to leave at once, to live with my grandmother until the wedding. The decision had been made without me. The morning I left, my siblings wept. Nan tried to comfort me, and I felt as though I were being quietly erased from my own life. I wanted to protest, to demand answers. Instead, I obeyed. At my grandparents' home, I was received with warmth and calm. Dame Agnes set me at ease. Though her manner was firm and perceptive, she wasted little time in preparing me for what lay ahead. She spoke of duty, of household management, of childbirth, of marriage, not as a dream, but as a reality. It was she who answered the questions no one else would. Yes, she told me gently, when I asked of the marriage bed. There is pain, but also pleasure and love, if you are fortunate. Her honesty frightened me, but it also steadied me. In the days that followed, I learned of fabrics and colors, of servants and responsibilities, of the quiet authority a mistress must hold. And slowly, I began to change. Yet even in that growing confidence, shadows remained. I overheard my grandparents speaking one night of Queen Isabella, of danger, of power, and of Janen's connection to her. Their voices held concern, fear even. It planted a seed of unease in me that would not fade. When Geoffrey visited, he confirmed what I had heard in whispers. My parents had been summoned to Castle Rising by the Queen Mother, and Janen, my Janen, was somehow connected to her world, a world of power, intrigue, and danger far beyond anything I understood. You must be careful, Geoffrey warned. His words lingered long after he left, and yet, even knowing all this, even sensing the storm gathering beyond my sight, I could not deny the truth within me. I desired Janen. I longed for the life he offered. I feared it, and still I stepped toward it, because I had never been taught how to step away, because I did not yet believe I could choose otherwise, and perhaps, even then, I was already too far along the path to turn back. Chapter 3. In the morning, noticing that I remained quiet and withdrawn, Dame Agnes suggested that I accompany my grandfather to their parish church for prayer. She insisted that I had worked hard enough and needed fresh air, a change of spirit. St. Mary Aldermary was much like my own parish, filled with the murmured prayers of chantry priests and the subdued presence of wealthy merchants seeking redemption. As we entered, the familiar rhythm of whispered devotions soothed me at once. Grandfather settled near the altar, lowering himself onto a cushion embroidered by Dame Agnes's careful hand. I watched him for a moment, his broad shoulders bent in reverence, his head bowed in quiet faith. I loved him deeply in that instant. His steadiness, his kindness, his calm. I went to the statue of the Blessed Virgin and knelt. There, in that stillness, I poured out my fears, my confusion, my uncertainty, my longing for reassurance. Speaking silently to the gentle Mother of God, eased something within me. For a little while, I felt anchored again. On our walk home, Grandfather spoke of my parents' marriage. He could not believe his fortune. He said softly of my father, such a beautiful bride, but there was no joy in his voice. When I looked up, I saw sadness in his eyes. You need not hide it from me, I said. I know my mother has been difficult. He gave a rueful smile and squeezed my hand. You listen too well, Alice, but that is no fault. It will serve you. He paused, thoughtful. Perhaps we err in marrying our daughters so young, he added. Your mother dreamed of a life your father could never give her. A life beyond her station? I asked. Yes, he said simply. It struck me then that my mother's discontent had little to do with my father himself. She would have been unhappy regardless, and that thought, though it relieved him, did not comfort me. I have been pushed from the nest, I said lightly. He looked troubled, but said no more. As we entered the yard, my thoughts shifted at once. There stood my mare. She calmly ate from Dame Agnes's hand, while a man with sun-darkened skin stood nearby. Master Thorne, my instructor. Within moments, I was changed into a simpler gown and guided toward my first true lesson. Mounting the horse was both terrifying and exhilarating. The ground seemed distant, the air sharper, my body uncertain of itself. But as the mare began to walk, slowly, gently, I felt something unexpected. Peace. A strange, deep calm, as though her movement steadied something within me that had long been unsettled. "She suits you," Master Thorne said, and I knew he was right. When asked her name, I chose without hesitation. Serenity. My grandmother laughed, but not unkindly. The days that followed passed swiftly. Between riding lessons and preparations for my wedding garments, I scarcely had time to think. Yet in those moments on horseback, I found something I had never known before, a sense of self that belonged to me alone. Still, even in happiness, doubt lingered. When I confessed to Dame Agnes that I feared taking too much pleasure in riding, she smiled gently. "God does not forbid joy, Alice." I wanted to believe her, but I was beginning to understand that joy and fear often walked hand in hand. Shannon returned sooner than expected. His arrival caused a flurry of preparation. My gowns were completed in haste, my appearance carefully arranged. When I entered the hall to greet him, I scarcely recognized myself. Dressed in silk and gold, adorned with pearls, I felt transformed, elevated beyond the girl I had been. And when Shannon saw me, his expression changed, from impatience to delight, from delight to something deeper, something that stirred both excitement and unease within me. "You are a vision," he said. His touch, his gaze, his admiration, it awakened something powerful in me. I felt alive in his presence, as though I existed more fully under his attention. Yet, that feeling did not remain unchallenged. When he spoke lightly of replacing my mare, I felt my confidence crumble. My love for Serenity seemed childish in his eyes, and I was reminded, painfully, how much older, how much more experienced he was. Still, I composed myself. There was no turning back. At dinner, conversation flowed easily. Shannon spoke of his travels, of trade, of the future we would share, and when he invited us to dine at his own home the next day, my heart leapt with anticipation. His house was magnificent. Like his parents' home, it was filled with color and richness, but it bore his own mark. Orderly, deliberate, impressive. I moved through it in wonder, touching fabrics, admiring objects, trying to imagine myself as its mistress. Then he led me upstairs, to the bedchamber. The room was vast, filled with light, its furnishings elegant but restrained. It felt private in a way the rest of the house did not. There, he told me something that unsettled me. He had recently been at Castle Rising with the Dowager Queen, and my parents had been there as well. I feigned surprise, though my heart raced. Why would such a woman concern herself with my family? Why would my marriage matter to her? His answers were careful, measured. There was danger in this connection. Danger he did not fully explain. And yet, even as unease grew within me, so too did something else. Excitement. To be part of a world that touched royalty, however shadowed, was intoxicating. Then he kissed me. Not as before, deeper, more urgent. His arms held me tightly, his desire unmistakable. For a moment, I resisted, out of fear, confusion, but then I gave in. This was what I had longed for, this closeness, this intensity. But when it ended, something had shifted, and I found myself asking a question I had long avoided. "My mother," I said. "Why does she hate you?" What followed changed everything. He spoke of her bitterness, her dissatisfaction, her attempts to provoke jealousy in my father. He spoke of her turning her attention toward him, not out of love, but out of hunger, and he admitted, reluctantly, that she had desired him, that he had avoided our house because of it. The truth was painful, but it explained so much, and in understanding it, I felt something loosen inside me. My mother's anger was no longer a mystery. It was jealousy, and I, whether I wished it or not, had become her rival. After that, nothing felt quite the same. Not my past, not my family, not even myself. Yet when Janan spoke again of the future, of the Queen Mother visiting, of the life we would share, I allowed myself to believe in it, to hope, though even then, I sensed that the world I was entering was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And still, I stepped forward, because I wanted it, because I loved him, because I did not yet understand the cost. Chapter 4. My wedding day dawned clear and cool, the sort of morning that should have filled me with calm and quiet joy. Instead, I lay awake long before sunrise, staring into the dimness of the chamber, my thoughts churning in restless circles. Sleep had come only in shallow fragments through the night, broken by anxious dreams and the constant tightening in my chest. Each time I woke, I felt as though something momentous and irreversible stood waiting just beyond the next breath. I could not eat. The mere thought of food made my stomach twist. My body felt too light, as though it might drift away if I did not anchor myself to something solid. Yet at the same time, I shivered beneath the covers. Though the room was not particularly cold, fear and anticipation warred within me, and I could not tell which was stronger. When Gwen entered with the others, bringing candles and murmured greetings, I forced myself to sit up and greet the day as a bride should. They dressed me with great care. Gwen, Nan, Dame Agnes, and Kate, moving about me in a quiet flurry of silk and whispers. The gown, deep red escarlate, had been made to fit me so precisely that it seemed less a garment than a second skin. It hugged my waist and hips, flowing just enough to allow me grace of movement. The richness of the fabric shimmered when I turned, catching the candlelight in a way that made me seem warmer, more alive than I felt. "You are beautiful," Gwen said softly, fastening the final ties. Dame Agnes's eyes shone with tears. "More than beautiful. You look as though you were born for this moment." Her words unsettled me. Born for this moment. As though everything that had come before had led inevitably here. To this day. This marriage. This life that I had not entirely chosen for myself. Gwen lifted a small mirror so I might see. I tried to take in my reflection, but could only glimpse parts. The curve of my cheek, the gleam of pearls in my hair, the brightness of my eyes. I turned, trying to see more, but the image always escaped me. "I wish we had a larger mirror," I said, attempting lightness. "Trust us," Nan replied. "You are perfect." A knock at the door broke the moment. The others moved instinctively, shielding me as Kate went to answer. My breath caught in my throat. "Dame Marjorie," Kate announced. My heart sank. My mother entered, composed and elegant, dressed in her finest silk. She paused just inside the doorway, as though uncertain whether she would be welcomed. For a fleeting moment, I saw something vulnerable in her expression, but it vanished almost at once. I stepped forward. "Mother, I am glad you are here." She hesitated before approaching, her eyes studying me closely. "I should like Gwen to remain," she said coolly. "As witness that I have come in peace." "Peace?" I echoed. "We are not at war." Her lips curved slightly. "Your father thinks otherwise." The room seemed to grow colder. Soon we were alone, and her attention turned fully upon me. She examined my gown, my hair, my shoes, her fingers lingering on the richness of the materials. "You have done well," she said. "Such finery. You have learned." "I have learned from you," I said carefully. She dismissed that with a flick of her hand, then fixed me with a look that made my pulse quicken. "I must tell you what to expect tonight." A chill crept through me. "There is no need." "There is every need," she interrupted. "Dame Agnes does not know your husband as I do." The implication struck me before I could stop it. My hand lifted instinctively, but she caught my wrist, laughing softly. "You did not know?" she murmured. "How innocent you are." "What are you saying?" I demanded. She leaned closer. "That there will be no consummation tonight. Your father has forbidden it. Janet has sworn to wait until you are 16. For a moment, I could not breathe. "No, that cannot be true." "But it is." Her voice was almost gentle now, which made it all the more cruel. "Your marriage is business, child. Protection. Your father loves you in his way. Confusion twisted into something sharper. Disappointment, yes, but also a strange sense of loss. I had feared the bridal bed, yet the thought of it being denied now felt like something precious had been taken from me before I could even understand it. When she left, I felt hollow. The day passed in a blur. Voices, faces, music, all of it seemed distant, as though I were moving through a dream. Only Janet's presence felt real. He stayed close to me, his hand finding mine again and again, his gaze warm, intent, full of something that did not resemble restraint. That gave me hope, yet doubt lingered. At the church, as I spoke my vows, I felt each word tighten around me like a binding. Obedience, duty, trust. I wondered which of them would be tested first. Afterward, when my father embraced me, I could not hold back my question. His answer was uncertain, evasive, enough to deepen my unease. By the time we reached the bridal chamber, I was trembling with more than cold. The rituals passed in a haze. The laughter, the teasing, the press of bodies crowding the room. I felt exposed, fragile beneath their gaze. But when Janet came to me, when he sat beside me and wrapped his arm around my shoulders, something within me steadied. "I love you," he whispered. And when we were finally alone, everything changed. There was no hesitation in him, no restraint. He came to me with warmth, with urgency, with a hunger that answered something deep within me. When he touched me, kissed me, held me, the fear that had haunted me all day dissolved into something far more powerful, desire. I did not think, did not question. I gave myself to him completely. Pain came, sharp and brief, but it was swallowed by the overwhelming intensity of the moment. His laughter, his voice, the closeness of his body, all of it became the center of my world. Afterward, as I lay beside him, I realized with quiet certainty that my mother had lied, and yet my father had not fully denied it. That thought lingered, even as happiness filled me. The days that followed were filled with a joy I had never known. Janin treated me not as a child, but as a partner. He sought my opinion, trusted my judgment, encouraged my curiosity. I grew quickly into my role, discovering strengths I had not known I possessed. Still, shadows remained, and they deepened when we traveled to Fair Meadow. There, I prepared to meet a woman whose presence seemed to command the world around her. Isabella. From the moment she arrived, I understood why she was feared and admired in equal measure. She carried herself with effortless authority, her gaze sharp, her movements precise. She did not need to speak loudly to be obeyed. When she looked at me, I felt as though she saw everything. My fear, my uncertainty, my inexperience. Yet she smiled, and she approved. She spoke of our marriage as though it were something she had shaped. She spoke of my husband as though she knew him intimately, too intimately. The thought took root before I could stop it. That night, I asked him, "Were you lovers?" He laughed, denied it, and then he kissed me, and the question dissolved beneath the force of his affection. I let it go, because I loved him, because I feared the answer, because I was young, and happiness felt too fragile to risk. But somewhere within me, something had changed. A small crack had formed beneath the surface of my certainty, and, though I did not yet understand it, I knew, quietly, deeply, that one day I would have to look more closely at the truths I had chosen not to see. Chapter 5. On the day the Dowager Queen was to depart, I awoke before dawn with a sickness in my stomach that seemed to have no cause, and yet would not be dismissed. At first, I lay still, my hands folded over my middle, hoping that, if I did not stir, the unease might pass like a fleeting shadow. But the sensation lingered, deepened even, until it seemed to fill my whole body with a faint, trembling dread. The chamber was quiet, touched only by the pale gray light creeping through the shutters. I could hear the distant movements of the household, the soft thud of footsteps, the murmur of voices. the occasional clatter of a bucket or a door. It was a morning like any other, and yet it did not feel so. Something in me was unsettled, as though I stood on the edge of a change I could not yet name. When Gwen entered, she paused at once, studying my face with concern. "You look unwell, mistress," she said gently. "Shall I ask Dame Tomasa to take your place in the hall? None would blame you." "No," I said, though my voice lacked strength. "I must go. It would be discourteous not to bid her grace farewell." Even as I spoke, I wondered whether my insistence came from duty or from something closer to fear. The Dowager Queen had unsettled me from the moment I first met her. Even in her kindness, there was something that suggested power beyond ordinary understanding. I did not wish her to depart thinking ill of me, yet in the end, I need not have troubled myself at all. Isabella broke her fast in her chamber and remained there until everything was prepared for departure. We gathered below, waiting in a strange, suspended quiet. But she did not come down until the last possible moment. I turned to Dame Tomasa, unable to keep my curiosity at bay. "Have we offended her grace?" I asked quietly, "that she keeps herself so apart on this last morning?" "She is indisposed," my mother-in-law replied. "When she drinks too much brandy wine, her sleep is troubled. She wakes unrested, plagued by dreams." Dreams. The word lingered in my mind. I wondered what visions might disturb such a woman, what memories could follow her even into sleep. But before I could dwell on it further, the stillness broke. Servants hurried, voices rose, hoofs sounded in the yard. And then she appeared. She looked pale, her strength somewhat diminished, yet she was dressed for riding and carried herself with the same undeniable authority. There was something almost defiant in it, a refusal to yield to weakness. We bowed, spoke our farewells, and she departed. Only when she was gone did I feel the house breathe again. It was after her departure that I allowed myself to consider what had been quietly growing within me. Not just suspicion, but hope. I might be with child. At first, I scarcely dared to think it. My flowers had been irregular since my wedding, and I had told myself that it meant nothing. But 5 mornings of queasiness could not be ignored, nor the tenderness in my body, the strange heaviness, the sudden waves of exhaustion. When I finally spoke of it to Dame Tomasa, listing each sign with hesitation, she did not hesitate at all. She drew me into her arms with a joyful sigh. "My precious daughter," she said, "you must tell Janin at once." I shall never forget his reaction. Joy transformed him. His usual confidence softened into something deeper, more vulnerable. He reached for me as though I were something fragile and precious beyond measure. "I will not break," I told him softly. "You may hold me." And he did. That night, wrapped in his arms, I felt more secure than I had ever felt in my life. Even when the sickness returned in the morning, I did not regret it. I would have borne far worse for such happiness. From that moment, everything changed. I was cherished, indulged, protected. Every whim was granted, every discomfort eased. I laughed at the absurdity of it, yet secretly delighted in the attention. And yet, even in happiness, there were shadows. I could no longer ride serenity, and soon we would leave Fair Meadow. London welcomed us back with noise, color, and endless activity. Life resumed quickly. Household management, church, visitors, obligations. Janin introduced me more fully to his world, but he gave me one warning. "Speak not of the Queen Mother," he said. At first, it seemed a small thing, but the more he explained, the more I understood. Power was not merely given. It was watched, measured, envied. Silence was safety. Still, the secrecy unsettled me. It felt like standing in sunlight while knowing there was a storm just beyond the horizon. My days became filled with work and learning. I managed servants, oversaw purchases, arranged furnishings. I discovered that I took great pleasure in shaping a household, not merely maintaining it, but improving it. Yet my moods were unpredictable. At times, I felt light and joyful. At others, I was near tears for no reason at all. It was during this time that I found comfort in the church and in Dom Hanai. He listened. He did not dismiss my fears. He prayed with me, and in that, I found a quiet strength. Not all of Janen's world pleased me. Richard Lyons disturbed me from the moment I saw him. His gaze was bold, intrusive, his manners coarse, yet he was powerful, necessary, and so I endured him. The Lombards unsettled me as well. They were elegant, fascinating, but dangerous, favored by the king, resented by the guilds, entangled in trade, power, and secrecy. I began to understand that Janin moved within a world far more complex than I had imagined, and I was now part of it. When he told me he must travel again, I felt my heart sink. "I must go now," he said gently. I wanted to protest, to beg him to stay, but I saw that he had already decided, so I let him go. His absence was long, but not empty. I learned. I grew. I took on responsibilities that once would have frightened me, and I waited. When he returned, my joy was overwhelming. He did not see me as diminished. He saw me as beloved, and when he felt the child move within me, his wonder was complete. But peace never lasted. Sir David arrived, and with him came news that unsettled me deeply. The Queen Mother would be godmother to our child. It was an honor, a blessing, a burden. Bella's birth had changed everything. She became my world, my center, my purpose. Yet Isabella remained. In the background, in the gifts, in the expectations, in the secrets. The night Janin finally spoke of her past, of rebellion, of hidden loyalties, of dangerous ties, I understood. We were not merely favored. We were involved, bound. From that moment, everything shifted. Happiness remained, love remained, but beneath it, uncertainty, risk, fear. And when the invitation came to Hertford Castle, to hunt, to attend, to stand once more before Isabella, I smiled. I prepared. I embraced the moment. But deep within, I knew. We were walking ever deeper into a world where favor and danger were one and the same. And one day, we might not be able to turn back. Chapter 6. Even now, long after the event, I can recall the exact sensation that filled me as we departed for Hertford Castle, a restless excitement that made it difficult to sit still. A year of marriage had brought many changes, yet nothing had prepared me for this. My first visit to a royal household. I was to meet the king. The thought alone made my heart race. The night before our journey, my excitement had been tempered by worry. I lay awake thinking of Bella, how she would fare without me, even for a short time. Yet beneath that concern was another truth. I did not know how I would fare without her. Still, once seated on Melisande, with the crisp morning air clearing my thoughts, and Janin riding beside me, I asked God to ease my fears. Gradually, he did. The bustle of London absorbed me at first. Then the quiet of the countryside soothed me. For a time, I forgot my anxiety, until I saw the castle. Hertford rose before us, its walls stark and imposing. As we passed through the gate and entered the bailey, I felt suddenly diminished, acutely aware of my origins. This was a royal residence. I was merely a merchant's wife. As Janin helped me dismount, I clung to him. "What are we doing here?" I whispered. "This is not our place." "You are an invited guest," he replied gently. "You belong here." Yet I could not shake the feeling. Inside, the grandeur overwhelmed me. Rich hangings lined the corridors. Servants moved with quiet precision, and the great hall seemed vast beyond measure. And then I saw him, the king. He sat upon the dais, his presence commanding. His blue eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I felt as though I had been completely seen. I had held my breath without realizing it, and gasped softly when he turned away. My steps faltered. Janin steadied me. "You are weary," he murmured. But I knew it was not weariness. We were soon brought to the Queen Mother's parlor, a chamber richly adorned, yet intimate. Isabella greeted us warmly. her composure unshaken despite what I later learned was fatigue. "You will rest," she said, "then join us for the feast." I spoke little, overwhelmed by everything around me. Afterward, I fell into a deep sleep, but waking brought confusion. "Where is Bella?" I cried. The fear was sharp and sudden. Janin and Gwen reassured me, yet I could not entirely shake the unease. I asked to visit the chapel. There I prayed. For Bella, for Janin, for myself. I prayed that I would not disgrace myself in this place of power. And then I realized someone had entered. The king knelt near the altar. The sight unsettled me more than anything else. To see such a man in humble prayer felt strangely intimate. When we left, my heart pounded. "We were in good company," Janin said lightly. "I know," I replied. The crown. The feast that evening was grand beyond anything I had known. The Queen Mother, King Edward, Queen Philippa, their kin, foreign nobles, all gathered. Among them was Richard Lyons. "What is he doing here?" I asked quietly. "He is useful," Janin replied. "They all spend beyond their means." Lyons unsettled me as always, but I was relieved to be seated among more familiar company. Geoffrey greeted me warmly, and his presence eased my tension. Conversation flowed easily between us, as it always had. With him, I felt again like the girl I had once been. "You have done well," he said with a teasing smile. "A fine husband, royal connections." I smiled, but did not answer directly. I had already begun to understand that such favor came at a cost. Later, in the garden, I was drawn into conversation about King Jean of France, held in England, yet treated with great courtesy. I spoke in defense of the king's generosity. "I think it most Christian," I said. At once, I sensed something shift. I turned. Queen Philippa stood behind me. "I am indebted to you," she said. I bowed deeply, unable to speak. She invited me to walk, and I followed, heart racing. She spoke kindly, of Bella, of gardens, of household matters, yet there was something beneath her warmth, a careful attention, as though she were assessing me. "You enjoy such work?" she asked. "I do, Your Grace." I could use such a mind near me. The words lingered. Later still, I encountered the king again. He addressed me directly, his tone almost playful. "Would I do better to invest in spices or furnishings?" he asked. I answered as best I could, though I feared I spoke too freely. He watched me in a way that made me suddenly aware of myself, of my body, my voice, my presence. "Pretty enough," he said at last. The words should have stung. Instead, they unsettled me. That night, I could not forget his gaze. The hunt the following day brought relief. With the merlin on my glove, I focused entirely on the bird. The world narrowed to something simple and true. The king's approval unsettled me, but I forced myself to ignore it. Geoffrey later teased me. "You have attracted the king's interest," he said. I deflected, but he watched me closely. Before we left, Isabella spoke to me again. "The queen finds you pleasant," she said, "and the king admires you." Her words felt less like praise than something else, something deliberate. We returned to London in high spirits, but peace did not last. When I conceived again, we rejoiced. Yet my mother's cruelty cut me off from my siblings, and I found comfort instead with Dame Agnes. The pregnancy proved difficult, and then came troubling news. Isabella was ill. Janin grew anxious, more than I understood. His behavior changed. He became distant, preoccupied, fearful. I tried to reassure him, but he would not speak. When he left again, he warned me. If asked, "I am in France." "Why must we lie?" I asked. "For our safety." Then came the loss, the pain, the blood, the child gone. I mourned deeply. Only Bella brought me back. Afterward, something shifted. People withdrew. Conversations faltered. I sensed unease around me. Then came the stranger. He knew, or guessed. "Royal patronage brings dangers," he said. Fear followed me home. At Fairmeadow I sought peace. Yet even there, I dreamed of Fallen, of being unseen, unheard. Janin returned changed. More distant, more urgent, more afraid. He would not speak of Milan. He would not speak of the future. Then came the summons. to attend the Queen Mother, to travel again. At the hunting lodge, I learned the truth. Queen Philippa wished me at court, to serve, to leave my home, my child, and Janin had known, planned it, prepared me. Without telling me, the betrayal cut deeply. Why? I asked. For your safety, he said. For Bella. That night, I struggled between love and anger. He held me, persuaded me, and I yielded. But inside, something had changed. When my hope of another child failed, I felt stripped of my last defense. Jeffrey spoke plainly. This path is dangerous, but perhaps necessary. And I understood at last. We were no longer simply rising. We were being drawn into something far greater. As I held Bella, I made a silent vow. Whatever came, I would endure. For her. Because in this world, love alone was not enough. Strength would be required, and I would find it. Chapter 7. When had I ever truly been free to choose my own path? The Queen Mother and Janin had already decided my future. I was to become a lady of the court. Short of fleeing, I had no choice but to accept it. They claimed it was for my good, for Bella's safety. But what of my heart? Janin promised visits, promised we would still share time as a family when possible. Yet promises were poor substitutes for a life lived together. I wanted my husband beside me, my daughter in my arms, a home that was wholly ours. Instead, I was being drawn into something I neither chose nor understood. It troubled me deeply that this separation had long been planned, that the wet nurse, Bella's royal godmother, all had been steps toward this moment. I began to question everything. Why Janin had pursued me, why he had married me at all. I hated myself for letting such thoughts poison my memories. All that summer, I lived in quiet dread, hoping that perhaps the royal family would forget me. As the fields ripened, hope grew. Then came the summons to Hartford. The nightmare of the golden wolf returned to me, its muzzle stained with blood, its eyes fixed on me. I rode with dread so evident that Janin and Gwen feared I was ill. At the castle, I was told the Queen Mother wished to see me alone. Janin's expression told me he had expected this. I followed the page with heavy steps. Isabella's condition shocked me. She was no longer the formidable woman I had known. She seemed diminished, her strength gone, her breath labored. I have little time, she said. Sit near me. She dismissed her attendants. I know you are unhappy about your place at court, she continued slowly. It is an honor I did not seek, I admitted. I arranged it for your safety, and your daughter's. Fear gripped me. What danger? I will not tell you all. It would only be forced from you when I am gone. They? I whispered. She struggled for breath before continuing. Janin's family once saved someone dear to me, at great risk. They still protect that person. For this, I vowed to protect you and your child. And Janin? I asked desperately. Always in danger. She took my hand, cold and weak. Do not doubt his love. Pray for my soul. Do not curse me. I could not promise that. Outside, I collapsed into Janin's arms. I know little more, I said, shaken. But we are in danger. Who are they? What are you protecting? Anger rose within me. This is not some noble game, Janin. This is our life. He held me. You will be safe in the Queen's household. What of Bella? Of you? The plan was for Bella to remain here, with her godmother. No. My voice broke. He grasped my hands tightly. For her safety, she must be kept apart from both our families. I stared at him in disbelief. Then came the worst. There may come a time, he said quietly, when you must walk away from me, and from everyone. I will never abandon my daughter. You will be reunited with her, eventually. His words felt unreal. If someone gives you these, he said, showing me his rosewood beads, you must leave. That is the signal. I cannot, I whispered. For Bella, he said. Days later, Isabella died. The news struck like a blow. Janin and his mother reacted with a fear that terrified me. Soon after, I was summoned to Windsor. Leaving Bella and Janin felt like my heart was breaking. Yet I forced myself to be strong. Court life overwhelmed me. The grandeur, the rules, the endless expectations. It all felt foreign. I lost my way in corridors, cried myself to sleep, and clung to small moments of familiarity. My visits home became my only comfort, but even there, nothing felt secure. Bella was sent away to another household for her protection. I felt helpless. At court, I struggled to belong. The noble women mocked me, my knowledge of trade, my enthusiasm. To them, I was merely a merchant's daughter pretending to be more. Only Queen Philippa valued my skills, yet even her favor isolated me. Time passed. I longed for another child, believing it might free me from court, but it did not come. Then came the news that Geoffrey had been captured, and later, his release. Even joy felt distant. At Fairmeadow for one brief month, I had happiness again. Family, love, peace. Then it ended. Janet left again. Weeks passed. Then months. No word. Fear consumed me. In London, I prayed for news. And there, in a quiet church, I found it. A woman dropped beads. Janet's beads. My heart froze. "You must keep them," she said. "He will not return." She vanished before I could question her. At home, I found devastation. Tomasa had fled. Janet was gone. Forever. "Consider yourself a widow," Master Martin said. The word shattered me. I learned the truth. A secret. A dangerous one. Something tied to Isabella. Something powerful enough to destroy us. Back at court, I told the Queen. Her response chilled me. "There's a spy among us." No comfort. No answers. Only silence. I lived in grief and doubt. Did Janet love me? Or had I been part of a plan? The king's attention grew. Too close. Too dangerous. At Christmas, he wore my symbol. The woodbine. My dream. My secret. I realized then. This was no accident. Geoffrey warned me. The court was watching, judging. Still, when the king asked me to dance, I could not refuse. His touch burned. His presence overwhelmed me. For a moment, I forgot everything. Then it ended, and I knew. I was in danger. The Queen warned me. Be loyal. I understood. I was trapped. Between power, between survival, between love and loss. And I knew my life would never be my own again. Chapter 8. It was a winter of burials, and in that bitter season I learned what I had never truly believed, that even kings and queens could not escape suffering. Death moved steadily through the court. First came the loss of Sir Thomas Holland, a trusted captain, despite the scandal of his marriage. Then others followed in quick succession. Each death weighed more heavily than the last, but none struck as deeply as that of Henry of Grosmont, Duke of Lancaster. He had been not only a great commander, but a friend to the king and queen, and his passing cast a shadow over all. At his requiem mass, the nobility gathered in solemn splendor. Rich brocades from Lucca adorned the chapel, gold thread catching the candlelight. Yet beneath the grandeur lay fear. Rumors spread that the pestilence had returned, moving again across Christendom. I had been a child during its first arrival, but I remembered enough. My father had spoken often of that time, of fleeing, of finding death where safety had been sought. Now, those memories came alive again. In the Queen's sewing chamber, distinctions of rank dissolved. Noble women and servants alike whispered of pustules, of stench, of streets filled with corpses. For once, I was not excluded. Fear made us equal. Weeks later, Queen Philippa summoned me. She sat alone by the fire, her face lined with grief. Blanche of Lancaster lingered nearby, silent, her sorrow still fresh. At once I sensed something was wrong. "We have received word from Master Martin Perrers," the Queen said, taking my arm. "You must be strong." My breath caught. "What has happened?" She held my gaze. "Your husband and his mother have died in Milan. The pestilence." The world shattered. "No," I whispered, but the word had no power. Blanche came closer, her voice gentle. "I too grieve. I have lost my father." Her sympathy barely reached me. Janet was dead. Gone. I remember little after that. Darkness swallowed everything. When I woke, I felt as though I had entered another world, one filled with shadows and whispers. In my dreams, secrets took shape. They moved through vast chambers cloaked in darkness or royal splendor, murmuring truths I could not hear but knew to be dangerous. Some belonged to the former queen, some to the present king, some to the court itself, secrets that killed. I woke gasping, unable to breathe. Gwen bent over me, urging me to drink. "They have sent word every hour," she said through tears. "The Queen, the Duchess," but her voice faded. My thoughts had already begun to turn. They had not died of pestilence. I was certain of it. The story was too convenient, too final. Janin had been in danger. We all had. Milan, Lombardy, secrets. The memory of Master Martin's warning returned to me. The hidden man. The debt owed to Isabella. The protection that had bound Janin's family to forces beyond their control. Perhaps disappearance had not been enough. Perhaps death had been required. The thought chilled me, but it made sense. All my life, I had obeyed others. Parents, husband, queen. My path had never been my own. And now, I had nothing left, except Bella. That truth anchored me. I would not abandon her. I could not. The days that followed blurred together. The nightmares lessened, but my waking thoughts remained heavy. Visitors came, some out of kindness, others from curiosity. They spoke gently, urging me to look forward. Yet only Geoffrey truly understood. He sat beside me in silence, his presence more comforting than words. "I do not want to lose you," he said at last. "I miss him," I whispered. He raised his cup. "To your courage." Courage. It was not strength, I realized. It was endurance. Perhaps I had been remade. Not by choice, but by necessity. In chapel my prayers changed. No longer did I beg for the past. Instead, I asked for guidance, for purpose, and slowly, peace came. When the Queen summoned me back to duty, she allowed no lingering grief. "You must look forward," she said, "not back." I obeyed. Outwardly, work became my refuge. Cloth, color, design, things I could control. At Windsor, preparations for the Feast of St. George consumed us. Despite mourning and fear, the court embraced splendor with renewed fervor. I guided the Queen's attire, ensuring her garments flattered her changing form. The work required skill, patience, and diplomacy, as it gave me purpose. Geoffrey remained my anchor, coaxing me toward life. Others noticed my change. Richard Lyons showed unexpected gentleness. Sir William Windsor pursued me openly, his admiration difficult to ignore. Yet one absence weighed heavily. The king. He kept his distance. I told myself I was relieved. My heart disagreed. When Sir William invited me to dance, I accepted. Not for him, but to feel something. Geoffrey watched me closely. "Dare to be happy," he said. But happiness felt dangerous. Joan of Kent spoke more boldly. "We are not meant to live only as others command," she told me. Her words stirred something within me. A dangerous thought. Could I choose? I did not yet know. Then came the Queen's command. I was to travel with the king to Sheppey. The honor overwhelmed me. The responsibility frightened me. The journey was harsh. Wind, damp, endless gray skies. The island itself felt exposed, vulnerable to the sea. Yet something about it cleared my mind. When I first saw the king standing against the wind, I understood his power. He was unshaken, resolute. He took my hand. "I shall be your anchor." We walked together, alone. He listened to my thoughts, my words. Then he spoke of his past, of betrayal, of choosing his mother over his father, of the guilt that followed. "And yet," he said, "I found joy again." He looked at me. "And so shall you." I wanted to believe him. When I asked about the secret, about Janin, he refused. Not yet, but he promised. And that promise became everything. Later, during the hunt and the feast, I felt the shift more clearly. Not happiness, but possibility. And when he said he would bring Bella closer to me, I clung to those words. Because now, more than ever, I needed something to believe in. Perhaps my life was not ended. Perhaps it had only begun again. Chapter 9. I vowed to follow the king's advice, to find contentment in the life before me. It was far easier to vow than to fulfill. Yet I knew I must try. If I was to keep my child safe, I must retain the favor and protection of the royal household. But the pestilence made everything uncertain. Even King Edward's authority seemed powerless against it. The law courts opened and closed again and again. By midsummer, we were withdrawn to Sheen. The though even there was talk of fleeing farther into the countryside. Lionel, Earl of Ulster, remained for a time, and with him Geoffrey, whose presence was both comfort and burden. True to his promise, he kept me informed of what was whispered at court, and from him I learned that I was rumored to be the king's mistress. I was not surprised. Since Sheppy, the other women had treated me with cold caution. Yet the rumor frightened me. I shared a chamber with several women. I was never alone. Still, gossip did not require truth. I feared what might happen if the king, or worse, the queen, believed it. I prayed for guidance, yet saw no clear path to clear my name. My request to visit my grandmother was denied. The queen refused me firmly. "You will not risk the pestilence," she said. "We have sworn to protect you." Her tone left no room for argument. My world shrank. I found small comfort in the orphan sisters Catherine and Philippa de Roe, bright, curious girls who reminded me painfully of my own sister Mary. Elizabeth, one of the Queen's ladies, also offered companionship. She spoke often of her lost happiness, of a husband injured beyond recovery, of a life undone. She urged me to share my own grief, but I preferred to listen. Through her sister's letters, I learned how fortunate I was to remain under royal protection. Many widowed women were being forced into unwanted marriages or stripped of their property. For that alone, I was grateful. Richard Lyons, whom I had once disliked, proved himself a loyal protector of my affairs. I was ashamed of my earlier judgment. William Windsor returned. His attention revived something in me I had thought lost. He was handsome, attentive, alive, and I responded. Others noticed. Geoffrey teased me. Elizabeth pressed me. Even I could not entirely deny the truth. I felt alive again. Yet it was not love, and beneath it all lay something more dangerous. My feelings for the king. He no longer sought me out openly, but I missed his attention. And when I saw him with other women, jealousy tightened my heart. Then came scandal. Prince Edward had secretly wed Joan of Kent. The Queen's fury was unrestrained. "What an extravagance," she muttered. And no alliance gained. I watched Joan closely, trying to understand how she balanced love and defiance. Perhaps I learned more than I intended. The turning point came on a stormy August day. Geoffrey summoned me to the chapel porch. His appearance told me all was not well. "I have been to London," he said. Fear gripped me. "Who is dead?" "My sorrow, Alice," he said softly. "Your mother, your brother Will, Master Martin Perers." The world tilted. Grief consumed me. When I could speak again, I knew only one thing. I must go to my family. Geoffrey tried to dissuade me, but then he revealed something more troubling. Master Martin had shown no signs of illness before his death. There were whispers of murder. Fear deepened. Still, I chose to go. William Windsor offered to take me. I accepted. We traveled in secrecy. The journey felt both swift and endless. When I reached my childhood home, it felt both familiar and alien. Nan wept. Mary clung to me. Father stood broken, distant, diminished. I saw then how much had been lost. I resolved at once to act. Mary could not remain there. I took her and Nan to my grandmother. Dame Agnes welcomed us. She understood without explanation. Mary would stay. She would be safe. For that alone, the journey was worth the risk. But consequences followed swiftly. A royal escort arrived. The king himself had sent for me. Fear returned. On the journey back, William revealed what he had learned. The king was not angry with me. He was angry with the queen. That frightened me more. At Windsor, I was taken directly to the king. He spoke kindly. He praised my actions. He promised I would see Bella. Hope returned. The queen, however, surprised me. She showed no anger, only understanding. That night, I wept. For loss, for relief, for everything. And I dreamed of William. Desire had returned. Soon after, the king began to notice me again. Small conversations, quiet attention. It was enough. Too much. Then, tragedy struck again. The queen lost 2 daughters. Her grief was overwhelming. In those days, the king turned to me. He invited me hawking. We rode together, alone. There, away from court, we found peace. And one day, we spoke of grief. He took my hand. I did not pull away. He spoke of loss, of guilt, of burdens no one saw. I spoke of confusion, of faith, of pain, and then he kissed me. A simple gesture, yet it changed everything. Joy flooded me, then fear. I had crossed a line. The next morning, he did not appear. I told myself it was for the best. I knew what I must do. I must find a husband, a proper path. William might have been that path. But he was gone, sent north, and I was left alone, alone with my thoughts, alone with my longing, alone with a truth I could no longer deny. I was in danger, not from pestilence, not from court, but from my own heart. Chapter 10. I had little time to dwell on my dangerous feelings for the king. Queen Philippa consumed both her own energy and mine in preparing for the grand wedding of Prince Edward and Countess Joan. She forced herself to set aside disappointment and embrace celebration. Though her moods shifted unpredictably between joy and resentment, the entire household was to be dressed in green and white, the prince's colors, symbols not of autumn's decay, but of spring's renewal. It was an effort to create hope in a time still shadowed by death. I worked tirelessly, adjusting fabrics, responding to the queen's changing desires, reading her moods with constant vigilance. Each night, I collapsed into bed exhausted, yet her occasional praise and generosity sustained me. In late September, I rode with the royal procession, carrying the bodies of the young princesses to their burial. Villagers watched us pass with awe and fear, reminded of death's reach. Their eyes lingered on me, on my fine garments, my place beside royalty, and I felt both humbled and strangely removed from my former life. I was fortunate. That truth weighed on me. At Abingdon, I sought out my confessor, Dom Hanai. He came, and with him came comfort. We spoke of the dead. We mourned together. Then I confessed the burden on my heart. "Do you think God looks upon me with disgust?" I asked, "when I have so much and yet feel so restless?" He reassured me gently. Grief was no sin. My duties were fulfilled with grace. Still, he urged me toward acceptance, to find contentment in small joys. He also brought practical matters. Richard Lyons had been in Oxford, inspecting property for me. With their guidance, I began to take control of my own finances. Something solid, something certain in an uncertain life. I wanted to see the property myself. The Queen refused, but the King intervened. In the quiet of the chapel, he summoned me. There, speaking with easy familiarity, he asked about my investments. He admired my knowledge. He touched my hand, and, in that small gesture, the world shifted. "Edward," he said softly, urging me to use his name. I barely managed it. He granted me permission to travel to Oxford, and, just as quickly, withdrew into calm distance, leaving me shaken. At Oxford, I found confidence in business. The properties were sound, the investment wise. I made my decision without hesitation. For a moment, I felt in control of my life. That illusion shattered that night. I woke to suffocation, a rag forced into my mouth, hands binding me, darkness closing in. Terror consumed me as I was carried away. Then, nothing. When I woke, I was safe. Gwen was beside me. Richard Lyons and Dom Haney had saved us. The attackers were dead, but the truth was worse than the attack. The king's agent, Richard Sturry, came to speak with me. He confirmed what I had long feared. The danger surrounding me was real, deadly, and rooted in secrets tied to Isabella. "You need fear nothing," he said. But I knew better. Protection was not freedom. It was a cage. I returned to Windsor under guard, more aware than ever that I was not mistress of my own fate. Yet at court, everything appeared unchanged. The Queen showed kindness. She ordered new garments for me, rich, dazzling fabrics suited to a woman of the court. Her affection deepened, and with it came a troubling realization. I was being prepared. For him, the king's attention returned. Quiet, controlled, deliberate. He invited me to hunts, to small gatherings. He did not touch me. Not yet. But the tension grew. At Christmas court, the truth became impossible to ignore. I was displayed, dressed in brilliance, watched, desired, and I desired him. When spring came, the inevitable happened. We were alone. At the Mews, beneath mist and silence, we rode out to hunt. The world seemed unreal, softened, distant. as though we had stepped outside time. The hunt stirred something wild in me, and he saw it. "Your wildness draws me," he said. I knew then. There was no escape. Back in his chamber, the moment came. He kissed me, no longer gently. Desire burned through fear, yet I pulled away. "I am frightened," I said. He did not deny it. Instead, he spoke plainly. "You are a woman who has caught her king's heart." And then he offered himself. I hesitated. Duty warred with desire. Loyalty to the queen clashed with the pull of my own body. So I demanded what little power I could. Truth, promises, security for Bella. His answer came harshly. Janin had been murdered. Grief and anger drove me to strike him. In that moment, everything broke. He seized me, carried me to his bed. Power, raw, undeniable, stood between us. But I resisted. Not his desire, only the terms. "If you want me," I said, "take me as an equal." Something shifted then. He agreed, and when at last we came together, it was not as king and subject, but as man and woman. The world changed. There was no turning back. After that, nothing felt the same. I had crossed the line I had feared, and yet I did not regret it, because in his arms I found something I had not known I still sought. Not safety, not power, but life, and now I belong to it. Chapter 11. After our first lovemaking, when the force of passion had ebbed and the wild storm within me quieted, I woke not as the woman who had surrendered herself to the king, but as the widow of Janin. The contrast struck with merciless clarity. Edward lay beside me, one arm flung carelessly across the pillow, his breath slow and even, as if nothing in the world could trouble him. For a moment I watched him, studying the lines of his face softened in sleep, the silver threading his hair, the faint crease at his brow that even rest could not entirely smooth away. Then memory returned. Janin, the words Edward had spoken, so blunt, so brutal, rose again before me. Murdered, strangled, stabbed. My stomach turned. I drew away from Edward, curling in upon myself as if I might shut out the thought. But I could not. The image of Janin's final moments pressed upon me, vivid and unbearable. I imagined him struggling for breath, his strength failing, the betrayal of those who had taken his life. I pressed my hands to my mouth to stifle the cry that rose in me. Too late. Edward stirred at once. "What is it, sweet Alice?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Did I hurt you?" He reached for me, his hand warm against my shoulder. The tenderness undid me. All the grief I had held at bay since his disappearance came flooding back. I wept without restraint, calling Janin's name as though he might hear me, as though he might answer. Edward gathered me into his arms, holding me firmly, saying nothing for a time. "There is no shame in grief," he said at last, his voice low and steady. "He was beloved by you. Such love does not vanish." I clung to him, torn between past and present, between loyalty and desire. I did not know how to be both widow and lover. Sleep took me again, heavy and dreamless. When I woke, the light had changed. Edward was watching me. There was no impatience in his gaze, no trace of irritation at my earlier grief, only warmth. "Alice," he said softly, his hand moving over me with deliberate gentleness, as if reacquainting himself with my body. This time, I did not resist. The love we made then was different. Slow, careful, almost reverent. There was comfort in it, a quiet reassurance that I was not alone, that I had not been abandoned to my sorrow. Afterward, he held my hand. "I will not abandon you," he said, "and when the time is right, Bella will be with you." Bella. The name steadied me. Later, Gwen came to dress me. Her hands trembled so much that she fumbled with the laces. "What will the queen do?" she whispered. "I do not know," I admitted, and that was the truth. I trusted Edward's promise, but I did not trust the world around him. When I returned to my chamber, I found myself unable to move for a long time. I sat by the window, watching birds wheel through the sky, envying their freedom. At last, I told Gwen the truth of Janin's death, of the manner of it. She wept with me, and we prayed together, speaking of his kindness, his patience, his quiet strength. For the first time, I allowed myself to mourn him fully, and when the storm of grief passed, I felt something unexpected. Not guilt, not relief, but a strange sense of renewal, as if something within me, long withered, had begun to stir again. That realization frightened me. When the queen summoned me, I went with dread, but she received me with calm affection, as though nothing had changed. She spoke of Janen's soul, of masses to be arranged, of prayers to be said. Her composure unsettled me more than anger would have. Then she spoke of me. "You are a vision in red," she said. Her meaning was unmistakable. She had seen, she knew, and she approved. That night, Edward summoned me again. There was no hesitation now, no illusion, only truth. He desired me, and I desired him. At Windsor, life divided into two worlds. By day, I served the queen. By night, I belonged to the king. The court knew. They did not speak, but they knew. Joan confirmed it without hesitation. Her advice was practical, unsentimental. "Protect yourself," she said. Her words forced me to confront realities I had avoided. I must think not only of love, but of consequence. Edward, in contrast, spoke of constancy, of companionship, of something deeper than mere desire. I wanted to believe him, so I asked for something real: land, security, a future. He agreed. That agreement changed something between us. For the first time, I felt I had claimed something for myself, not merely accepted what was given. Our conversations deepened. We spoke not only as lovers, but as companions. He listened to me, valued my thoughts, included me in matters beyond the bedchamber, and yet the imbalance remained. In private, we were equals. In public, he was king, and I, nothing. That truth became impossible to ignore during the Garter festivities. The spectacle overwhelmed me. The power, the ceremony, the distance between us. I watched him ride, magnificent, untouchable, and I felt small. Geoffrey saw it. "You are troubled," he said. "I have lost my honor," I answered. But even then, I knew I would not change my choice. Joan's warning echoed in my mind. Love him, but never forget who he is. Then came William. His anger burned openly. "You are mine," he said. I denied him. I loved the king. The truth cut him deeply, but I would not soften it. He left in fury, yet he did not yield. "I will wait," he said. His confidence unsettled me, for it reflected my own fears. As the days passed, I found myself caught between worlds, between past and future, between safety and danger, between love and survival, and I understood at last. There was no simple path forward. I could not return to what I had been. I could only move ahead, carefully, deliberately, and hope that I would not lose myself in the process. Because in the king's world, love was never simple. It was power. It was risk. It was a force that could elevate or destroy. And I had already given myself to it. Chapter 12. After the guests departed, we removed to Eltham, where the royal households might recover from the exhausting celebrations. Though the journey was not long, it seemed to drain what little strength remained in Queen Philippa. By the time we arrived, she leaned heavily upon those assisting her, her once graceful movements now hesitant, uneven. The morning after our arrival, an Italian priest, Don Francisco, was announced. Despite her evident suffering, Philippa insisted on receiving him properly. We dressed her carefully, adjusting her gown to conceal how far she leaned forward as she walked, altering her headdress to draw attention upward, away from her failing posture. It was a quiet act of loyalty, a small attempt to preserve her dignity before the court. Even in pain, she was composed, gentle, resolute. Watching her, I felt both admiration and sorrow. She and the king remained secluded with the priest for many hours. When they finally emerged, they summoned much of the household to the chapel for prayer. The mass was solemn, heavy with unspoken meaning. Though it resembled a requiem, no name was given. Yet it was clear who mourned most. Edward knelt with bowed head, often covering his face. Philippa remained calm, devout, but not visibly shaken. Whoever had died, it was Edward's grief that filled the chapel. As I knelt, my thoughts turned restlessly. Could this be the death of the hidden one? The secret that had cost so many lives? Janen's life? If so, perhaps I might finally be free. But the thought struck me with unexpected force. I no longer wished to be free. Not if freedom meant leaving Edward. That realization unsettled me deeply. That night, no summons came. Not from the king, not from the queen. I lay awake, my mind racing, conjuring fears and possibilities. Each time I drifted towards sleep, I was dragged back by visions. Janen's face, pale and lifeless, Tomasa's silent grief, shadows of betrayal I could not name. At last, I abandoned sleep altogether and knelt in prayer. But even prayer offered little comfort. By morning, the king had departed. No message, no farewell. The absence struck more sharply than I expected. I had thought myself prepared, ready to accept whatever place I held in his life. Yet his silent departure stirred doubt. Had I misunderstood him? Had I imagined what had passed between us? Philippa explained simply, "He requires rest and prayer." But I required answers. Later, she summoned me to attend her once more with Dom Francisco. My heart pounded as I followed her. This time, I would learn the truth. The priest greeted us with calm formality, his pale eyes unsettling in their intensity. "The king has instructed me to speak freely before you," he said. And then he began. The story unfolded slowly, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. The hidden child was not Edward's father, as some had whispered, but Isabella's son, her child by Mortimer, a child whose existence threatened the throne itself. The Perers family, Janon's family, had protected him, carried messages, risked everything. My breath came short. Janon had not died for nothing. He had died for this, for a secret, for a child who was now dead. Too late to save him, too late to save my husband. When I asked how Janon and Tomasa had died, the truth came coldly. Torture, violence, fear. I felt something inside me break. Anger surged, raw, uncontrolled. "All this," I said, my voice shaking, "because you feared a child?" Philippa did not deny it. She spoke of regret, of choices made in fear, of consequences that could not be undone. I listened, but I could not forgive. Not yet. Still, I remembered where I stood, who she was. I bowed my head. "I am your servant." But inside, something had changed. Afterward, I sought the only escape I knew. I rode. Millicent carried me across fields and through quiet paths as I let my emotions rise and fall. Grief, rage, despair. I cried out to the wind, and slowly, I calmed. When I returned, I confided everything to Gwen. Once, only once. It was enough. The next day, everything changed. I was summoned to Hartford, to Bella. Joy overwhelmed me. For the first time in months, I felt free. The journey passed in a blur, and then I saw her. Bella. She had grown, changed. Yet I knew her instantly. "Mother," she said. That single word broke me. We were strangers at first, careful, uncertain. But slowly, we found each other again. We sewed together, rode together, planned a future, and for a brief time, I was whole. Yet even in happiness, I understood something new. I could not remain as I had been. Too much had been lost. Too much demanded strength. I would not allow Bella to be taken from me again. I would fight. Not openly, not recklessly, but carefully, strategically. The innocence I had clung to was gone, and in its place, something stronger had begun to grow. When I returned to court, I was no longer the same woman. I had mourned, I had learned, I had chosen, and now I would act, because love alone was not enough. Not in this world, not in a king's court. Here, one must be more than loving, one must be wise, and I would be, for Bella, for myself, and for whatever future still remained within my reach. Chapter 13. I had been holding my breath for 2 years, even as I learned to move through the glittering, treacherous world of court, even as I found purpose in serving Queen Philippa, and later, solace in the king's arms. Some part of me had remained suspended in that long moment of uncertainty, half believing Janon might yet return, half fearing what would happen when the fragile balance of my life shattered. Now that balance had shifted beyond recall, I had thought Edward might anchor me. Instead, I discovered that loving a king was like surrendering to the pull of the sea. One moment I was lifted, buoyed, carried toward joy. The next, cast adrift, struggling to keep my footing as the tide withdrew. Philippa had warned me. To love a king was to dance toward him, and away again. I was learning that dance. In the summer of 1362, I began to understand something more. Not only the nature of love, but the nature of myself. I remembered a day from my childhood with sudden clarity. My father had taken me to his undercroft to meet a merchant from Ormuz, a man who traded in pearls. He had been unlike anyone I had ever seen, his skin darkened by sun, his garments rich and scented, his laughter deep and unrestrained. I had believed, with all the certainty of a child, that pearls possessed tiny holes, so they might breathe underwater. The merchant had laughed, not cruelly, but with delight. And then he had shown me the truth. A pearl was not born perfect. It was formed from irritation, from pain. A grain of sand entered the oyster's shell, and to protect itself, the creature covered it, layer upon layer, until what had once caused discomfort became something smooth, luminous, beautiful. That memory returned to me now with startling force. Was I not the same? Had not my life, my losses, my grief, my confusion, become the grain of sand around which I was forming something new? Edward seemed to think so. "You are the pearl in my life," he told me once, drawing me close, his voice soft with affection, a creature of beauty and light. I wanted to believe him, and for a time I did. Our days together at the hunting lodge were filled with a strange, fragile happiness, removed from the rigid structure of court, freed from constant watchfulness. We existed almost as equals. We spoke openly of the past, of the future, of the secret that had cost so much. I told him of my pain, of Janin, of the injustice. Edward listened. He did not excuse what had been done, but neither did he deny it. "What was done could not have been otherwise," he said quietly. "The boy could never have been safe." Perhaps he was right, but understanding did not ease the ache. Still, I chose not to dwell in bitterness. "For Bella and me to flourish," I said, "I must seek the light." And I meant it. We spoke of his children, of their futures, of the kingdom he was shaping, and sometimes we spoke of something simpler, of what it might mean to live quietly, together. Those were dangerous dreams, but I let myself believe in them. The chamber he prepared for me reflected that dream. Silks and cushions in rich colors, walls adorned with scenes of Diana's hunt, a ceiling painted like the night sky. It was beautiful, intimate, a world apart. There, we were not king and subject. We were simply man and woman. When the time came for me to leave, Edward gave me a ring, a signet, our initials entwined. "Write only if you need me," he said. It was both a promise and a warning. At Fair Meadow, I found something I had almost forgotten: peace. The land breathed differently than court. The air carried the scent of earth and growing things. Time moved more gently. And Bella was there. She ran to me. And in that moment, everything else faded. We built a life together. Simple, honest. We planted roses. We sewed gowns. We walked in the fields. And slowly, we healed. Yet even there, the world intruded. Visitors came. Merchants. Men who knew. They spoke of my favor at court, of influence I did not claim. And I realized there was no escaping what I had become. Even here, I was not simply Alice. I was the king's woman. Grandmother saw it clearly. More clearly than I wished. Her words struck deep. Adulterous liaison. The truth, spoken without softness. For a moment, anger rose. But beneath it, shame. And beneath that, understanding. I had chosen this path. Or perhaps it had chosen me. We made peace. Not perfect, but enough. Time passed. Seasons turned. And I grew stronger. More certain. Until everything changed again. Edward's mood shifted. His health faltered. His patience wore thin. Gout, age, fear. And I saw, for the first time, his vulnerability. Sometimes he clung to me. Other times, he pushed me away. I learned to endure, to wait, to find stability where I could. In my lands, in my work, in Bella. Then, in the winter of 1364, I knew, before I spoke it, before I allowed myself to think it fully, I knew I was with child, Edward's child. Fear took hold, not the soft fear of uncertainty, but a sharp, cutting dread. What would he do? What would the queen do? What would become of us? I delayed telling him, for as long as I could, but at last, I sent word, and waited. When the summons came, I felt as though I were walking toward judgment. The journey to Eltham passed in cold silence. Even the beauty of the snow could not ease my fear. When I stood before Edward, I forced myself to speak plainly. "I am with child." Silence. Then questions. Thought. Withdrawal.
I returned to my chamber hollow, certain I had lost him. But when he sent for me again, everything changed. He was joyful, radiant. Our love has been blessed, he said, and for a moment, I believed. We celebrated. We loved. And yet, even in that joy, uncertainty remained. For I understood now, more clearly than ever, what it meant to carry a king's child. It was not private, not simple. It was power, danger, and a future I could not yet see. As Edward spoke of plans, of protection, of seclusion, I felt the weight of it settle upon me. I was no longer merely his lover. I was the mother of his child. And that changed everything. Chapter 14. Bella, Nan, Dom Hanai, and Gwen came with me to Southery at the beginning of my confinement, and in their presence, I found a fragile sense of safety. Yet even in that seeming sanctuary, I understood that my life had entered a new and uncertain chapter. Southery stood on the edge of the fence, a place unlike any I had known before. The land seemed to breathe differently there, wide, open, restless. Water and earth mingled in ways that unsettled me, and the sky stretched endlessly above, vast and indifferent. At first, I felt exposed, vulnerable, as though the land itself might swallow me. But Bella loved it. She ran through the reeds, chased birds across the marshy ground, laughed at the strange calls echoing over the water. Her joy pulled me outward, anchored me in something real and immediate. For her sake, I learned to love the fens, or at least to accept them. Within the manor, life settled into a quiet rhythm. Nan governed the household with sharp intelligence and unwavering discipline. Though age had bent her body, it had not dulled her mind. She oversaw every detail, from the kitchen fires to the servants' duties, with a precision that inspired both fear and respect. Gwen admired her openly, and I relied on her completely. Robert Brune proved equally invaluable. He moved between my properties with confidence, ensuring that each was well managed, each investment sound. He understood my ambitions, not merely to survive, but to build something lasting for my children. For Bella, for the child I carried, I would not depend solely on Edward. That lesson had been taught to me too clearly. Yet even in the quiet of Southery, my thoughts were seldom at rest. I worried for the future, for the Queen, for Edward, for myself, and most of all, for the child within me. Would it be a son, a daughter? Would it be taken from me? Dom Hanai spoke gently, offering what comfort he could. If it is a boy, he said, he will be raised for greatness. But greatness, I knew, came at a cost, and I feared that cost would be me. When Edward summoned me to Ely, I went. Despite my fears, despite my condition, those days with him were softer than I had expected. We walked together, talked, rested in each other's arms. There was less urgency between us now, less passion, but more, something deeper, or so I told myself. Yet even then, I sensed a change. Edward spoke more of the future, of arrangements, of protections, and I understood. He was preparing for something, for me, for the child, but also for a world in which I might not remain as I was. Back in Southery, I waited. Time passed slowly, each day stretching long and uncertain. When Mary arrived, bringing news of Geoffrey's betrothal, I listened with interest, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Always, they returned to the child, to what was coming. And then, at last, the waiting ended. My labor was long, painful, but when it was over, I heard the cry. A son. Edward's joy was immediate, overwhelming. A miracle, he called him. And I believed him. For a moment, all fear fell away. There was only love. But even in that moment, I knew this child would not remain mine. He would belong to the world, to the king, to destiny. I named him John, and held him close, while I still could. When the summons came from Queen Philippa, calling me back to court, I obeyed, though my heart resisted. Leaving John behind felt like tearing something from my very soul. Yet I went, because I had no choice. At Windsor, the familiar halls felt different, colder, more distant. The Queen received me without anger, without reproach, but also without warmth, and I understood. She knew, yet she chose silence, and in that silence, I felt both mercy and judgment. The journey to Kenilworth was difficult for her. Pain etched itself into every movement, every breath. I watched her closely and saw, for the first time, the fragility beneath her strength. At Kenilworth, the court shone with brilliance, light, color, music, a world of splendor. But beneath it, tension, expectation, and for me, visibility. No longer could I move unseen. I was known, watched, judged. Some courtiers sought my favor, others, my downfall. I learned quickly to listen, to observe, to speak carefully, because now everything mattered. My son, my future, my place. Edward's affection remained, but it had changed. Less passion, more dependence. He needed me, and that need both comforted and frightened me. Then came sorrow, war, illness, death. Loss followed loss. Prince Edward's suffering, the deaths of Lionel and Blanche. Each blow weakened the king, and I became his refuge. But I could not shield him from everything, nor could I shield myself. When he spoke of William Windsor, of jealousy, of betrayal, I felt something break. Trust, security, the illusion of safety. And when he took me roughly, in anger, in fear, I understood something I had long avoided. Love did not protect me. Not here, not in this world. Still, I remained, because I had nowhere else to go, and because, despite everything, I loved him. Time passed. I conceived again and prayed, not for power, not for favor, but simply for a daughter, for something I might keep. But fate was cruel. The child was lost, and with it, a piece of me. Edward comforted me. But grief lingered, and fear grew stronger. For now, everything was changing. The queen lay dying, and with her, the fragile balance of my world. When the summons came, Edward went. I remained, waiting, praying, fearing. And when the news arrived, Queen Philippa was dead. The loss echoed through the realm, through the court, through Edward, and through me. For with her passing, I lost not only a queen, but my protector, my shield, my fragile place in the world. Now, everything would change, and for the first time, I truly understood how alone I was. Chapter 15. I could not imagine Windsor without Queen Philippa. Even after months had passed, her absence lingered like an echo that would not fade. The halls seemed wider, colder, less certain of their purpose. The order she had imposed upon court life had dissolved into something looser, less restrained. And, in that shifting space, I felt the change most keenly in Edward. A part of him had died with her. He tried to hide it, behind laughter, behind indulgence, behind restless movement. But I saw it, and I feared what might follow. So I made a vow, quietly to myself. I would protect him, not as a subject protects a king, but as one soul shelters another. Yet even as I made that vow, I knew I might not be strong enough. At Fair Meadow, the world seemed distant. The grief that had overtaken the kingdom reached even there, but softened by fields, by routine, by the presence of my children. Still, the sense of loss was everywhere. In London, it was worse. Churches filled with mourners. Prayers whispered in every corner. The people feared what would come next. Not only the loss of the queen, but the fragility of the king, and the uncertainty of succession. Rumors spread like fire, of illness, of weakness, of division, and always of the future. I tried not to listen, but I could not ignore it, because my fate was bound to his. When Wycombe came to summon me, I already knew. Edward needed me, and I would go, no matter the cost. At King's Langley, nothing was as it had been. Edward greeted me with urgency, with hunger, not only of the body, but of the spirit. He clung to me, and I to him. For a time, we found comfort in each other, in familiarity, in the illusion of stability. But beyond those walls, the world shifted, power changed hands, voices grew louder, and I found myself drawn into it, against my will, against my instincts. Edward began to rely on me, in ways I had never intended, not just as lover, but as advisor, as gatekeeper, as shield. It frightened me, because I understood how dangerous that position was. To be visible was to be vulnerable, and I was no queen. I had no protection. Only Edward, and Edward was changing. His strength faltered, his mood shifted, his judgment sometimes wavered, and though I tried to steady him, I could not always succeed. The death of his grandson broke something in him, a quiet despair, a loss of certainty, and I saw, for the first time, the weight of the crown, not as glory, but as burden. I called for Wycombe, and he came. His presence brought calm, for a while, but even he could not restore what had been lost. The kingdom itself began to resist. Parliament challenged Edward, demanded change, and for the first time, I saw him yield. It frightened me more than anything else, because it meant he was no longer invincible, and if he fell, so would I. Still, life continued, in fragments, moments of peace, moments of joy. My children returned to me, and for a time, I allowed myself to forget, to simply be a mother. But even that was not mine to keep. John had changed, grown, no longer fully mine, and Bella chose a different path. Her desire for the church struck me like a quiet blow. Another loss, another separation. I tried to understand, to accept, but inside, I grieved, because one by one, everything I loved was slipping away. When Jane was born, I held her close, determined to keep her, to claim at least one thing as wholly mine. But Edward's reaction chilled me. A daughter meant little to him, and I felt, for the first time, distance between us. Not sudden, but growing, slow, uncertain, and dangerous. Because without his love, I was nothing. Yet, I was changing too. Stronger, more aware, less willing to simply accept. Still, I stayed, because love and fear held me there. At court, the whispers returned, louder now, sharper. I was no longer invisible, no longer overlooked. I was a presence, and with that came danger, enemies, jealousy, resentment. I learned to move carefully, to speak less, to listen more, to survive, because survival was no longer certain. Edward leaned on me more, trusted me, needed me, but that need became a burden, one I could not always bear, and yet I could not refuse, because I loved him, and because, without him, I had nothing. The years ahead loomed uncertain. The kingdom trembled, the king weakened, and I stood between worlds, not queen, not subject, something else, something fragile, something dangerous. And as I held my children close, watching the world shift around me, I understood. The time of innocence was over. What lay ahead would require strength I was not yet certain I possessed. But I would find it, because I must. For them, for myself, and for the uncertain future that awaited us all. Chapter 16. In gowns of cloth of gold, Edward and I dazzled the court. Yet beneath the brilliance, there was decay. The court saw splendor. I saw desperation. Edward clung to magnificence as though it might restore what he had lost. Power, certainty, youth, and I stood beside him, shining too brightly for a place I did not belong. The gold weighed heavily on my shoulders. Not only the fabric, but the meaning. I was no queen, yet he made me appear as one, and that illusion would cost me dearly. The whispers had begun long before. Now they grew louder, sharper, more dangerous. At first, I tried to ignore them, to believe that Edward's protection was enough, but I had seen already how power slipped from his grasp, how even kings could be challenged, and I had no such shield. When Duchess Constance arrived, Her disdain was immediate, cold, unmistakable. She did not need words. Her silence was condemnation enough. I had entered a world where I did not belong, and now they reminded me of it. Even Joan's kindness could not fully comfort me, because I knew she stood where I never could, legitimate, accepted, safe, and I was none of those things. Edward's mind began to betray him. At first, small lapses, forgetfulness, confusion, moments easily dismissed. But I saw the truth. Something was wrong, something deep and irreversible. The day he did not recognize our child, fear took root in me. A fear I could not silence. A fear that grew with every passing week. He resisted help, as always. Pride would not allow it, but even he knew. And when at last he yielded, it was not relief I felt, but dread, because now there was no denying it. He was failing, and with him, everything I depended upon. I tried to guide him, to steady him, but my voice no longer held weight. He listened less, dismissed more, and I began to understand. I was losing him, even before death claimed him. Still, there were moments, quiet evenings, soft laughter, fragments of what we had been, and I clung to them, desperately, because they were all I had left. The world beyond our chambers grew hostile. Rumors spread of my influence, of my greed, of my corruption. They blamed me for everything. The war, the losses, the king's weakness, even his illness. It would have been laughable had it not been so dangerous. The attack on my lands proved that violence, hatred, no longer whispers, but action. And I realized I was no longer merely disliked. I was feared and despised. Edward could not see it, or would not. His world remained as he wished it to be, but mine was collapsing. William Windsor returned like a shadow from the past. His presence unsettled me. His claims shocked me, and Edward's reaction wounded me more deeply than I could have imagined. Doubt. After all these years, doubt. It broke something inside me. Not suddenly, but completely. I had given him everything, and still, he only questioned me. That was the moment I understood. Love was no longer enough. Not to protect me, not to sustain me. And yet, I remained. Because leaving was impossible. And because, despite everything, I still loved him. The tournament was the turning point. The moment illusion shattered. Before the crowd, before the kingdom, I was exposed. Not as a symbol, but as a target. Their hatred was unmistakable. Raw, unfiltered, terrifying. And I knew then, there was no returning from this. Edward had raised me too high. And now, the fall would be inevitable. His decline worsened, more frequent, more severe. I stayed by his side, as commanded, as expected, as required, but the cost was unbearable. I was no longer his lover, nor his companion, but his caretaker, his shield, his excuse, and I resented it, even as I pitied him, even as I loved him. My life had become a prison of duty, and outside, the world waited, hostile, unforgiving. When I finally stepped away, even briefly, I felt something unexpected, relief and guilt, because part of me no longer wished to return. Robert became my solace, my anchor, the one place I could rest, without fear, without judgment. With him, I remembered who I had been, before court, before power, before Edward, and slowly, without intention, without permission, I began to love him, not with the fire I had known before, but with something steadier, safer, more real. Yet even that felt dangerous, because I knew nothing in my life was truly mine, not my children, not my future, not even my heart. As Edward's strength faded, my fear grew, not only of his death, but of what would follow. because when he was gone, I would stand alone, unprotected, unwanted, and exposed to a world that had already judged me. The end was coming. I could feel it. In the silence, in the tension, in the way people looked at me. And though I prayed, I no longer asked for salvation, only for strength to endure what was to come. Chapter 17. Throughout Edward's long illnesses, I remained by his side with a devotion that had long ceased to be a choice. At times, I told myself that I stayed because he needed me. At others, I knew the truth more clearly, that I did not know how to leave. My life had grown so tightly wound about his that to step away felt like stepping into emptiness. Yet even as I remained, I saw the change. Not sudden, not dramatic, but relentless. My children became my refuge in those days. Joan and Jane filled the long corridors with laughter, their small voices echoing against stone walls that had grown too familiar with sorrow. They saw the palace not as a place of politics or decay, but as a wonder, a world of hidden corners, sunlight-filled windows, and endless possibilities. I watched them sometimes from a distance, listening to their games, their arguments, their delighted discoveries. Their innocence felt like something fragile and fleeting, a thing I could not protect forever. Bella had always been perceptive, more attuned than most to the undercurrents of emotion that ran beneath the surface of our lives. She watched her father with wary eyes, uncertain how to approach him, unsure which version of him she would encounter. Jane simply accepted what she saw. Children, I realized, had their own ways of surviving. Edward did not always recognize them. That truth settled heavily upon me. He would look at Joan and Jane with polite confusion, as though they were guests presented to him for courtesy. Sometimes he would smile. Sometimes he would nod. Sometimes he would say nothing at all. But when John entered the room, everything changed. "Our son," Edward would say, his voice filled with pride. In those moments, he was himself again, clear, certain, alive. John responded as any boy might, drawn to the strength and presence of his father, eager for approval, for acknowledgement. He carried himself differently in Edward's presence, standing straighter, speaking more carefully. With me, he was respectful, but distant. That distance hurt more than I cared to admit. I told myself it was natural, that boys must grow away from their mothers, must learn to define themselves apart from the gentle influences of childhood. Others assured me of the same, but I feared something else, that he was being taught to see me differently. The Percy household shaped him now, their values, their loyalties, their judgments, and I could not be certain what they said of me when I was not there to hear it. When Geoffrey spoke of John's betrothal to marry Percy, I forced myself to respond with gratitude. "It is a good match," I said. And it was. It would elevate my son beyond anything I had once imagined possible. It would secure his future in ways I could not. Yet I did not trust it. Mary was young, willful, sharp-tongued. She showed little respect for me, and less for the life I had built. Even under my care, she carried herself as though she stood above us all. I could influence her perhaps, or perhaps not. And behind the match lay something more troubling. Lancaster. His hand seemed to touch everything, every alliance, every decision, every movement of power. I remembered his words, spoken calmly, with quiet certainty, about my need for protection after Edward's death. Protection. The word lingered in my thoughts. What form would that protection take? At what cost? I had learned enough by then to understand that nothing in that world was given freely. Nothing. As Parliament approached, tension spread through the court like a slow-burning fire. Edward spoke of war again, of France, of conquest, of victories yet to come. He spoke with a conviction that might once have inspired confidence. Now, it stirred unease. Even his sons exchanged glances. Joan spoke softly to me, her voice edged with realism. "He cannot lead such a campaign. she said. I knew it. We all knew it. Yet no one dared to say it openly. In those weeks before Parliament, Edward seemed stronger. The visible signs of illness faded. His movements grew steadier. His speech more coherent. For a time, I allowed myself hope. But hope, I had learned, was a dangerous thing. I did not trust it. At King's Langley, we found a brief respite. Edward rode again, though cautiously. He hawked, though without the vigor of earlier years. He laughed more easily. And at night, we lay together in quiet intimacy. There was less urgency between us now, less fire, but something gentler had taken its place. We touched not out of hunger, but out of affection. We sought not to possess, but to comfort. I massaged his joints with oils, easing his pain where I could. He traced my body with familiar tenderness, bringing me to pleasure not through force, but through patience. It felt, in its own way, deeper than what had come before. Yet even in those moments, I knew time was shortening. When I asked to leave for Gaines during Parliament, he resisted at first. I need you, he said. And he did. But I needed something too. Space, air, freedom, however brief. At last he agreed, and I left. The journey down the Thames felt like a release. The air was lighter, the world broader. At Gaines, surrounded by my children and the quiet beauty of the land, I felt something I had nearly forgotten. Peace. But it did not last. News from Parliament reached me quickly, and with it, fear. The Commons had turned against us, against the court, against those they believed had misled the king, against me. Accusations spread like poison. Corruption, greed, manipulation. They said we had taken advantage of Edward's weakness, that we had enriched ourselves at the kingdom's expense, that we controlled him. The words struck like blows. Some were exaggerated, some were false, but not all. I could not deny my part entirely. I had accepted gifts, taken opportunities, secured my future where I could, and now I was to be judged for it. Fear consumed me. Every sound seemed a warning, every shadow a threat. I imagined arrest, imprisonment, loss, not for myself alone, but for my children. That fear drove me to act. I hid what I could, prepared for what might come, but nothing could truly prepare me. When the prince fell ill, everything changed again. His summons reached me like a final call, and I went, despite warnings, despite fear, because I still believed, foolishly perhaps, that loyalty mattered, that it would be remembered, that it would save me. I arrived too late. He died without seeing me, and with him died my last hope of protection. Edward's grief was overwhelming. He clung to me, and I to him. But even as we held each other, I knew. We were both standing at the edge. The future had already begun to unravel, and there was no turning back. From that moment, everything moved toward an end I could no longer avoid. Edward weakened further. The court grew colder, the world more dangerous, and I stood alone, waiting for what would come next. Chapter 18. Naked and bewildered, I had lost myself. It was as though I still spun within that endless dance, dizzy and disoriented, clutching at fragments of memory that would not settle into sense. I could not find my footing. I could not find the hand that had once guided me, Edward's hand. He was gone, and with him, everything that had defined me. His death had not come like a single blow. It had unraveled me slowly, thread by thread, until I no longer knew who I was without him. The voices around me swirled like a storm. Accusations, threats, condemnation. They pressed in from every side, each one demanding something from me, each one insisting upon my guilt, my shame, my fall from grace. And I could not answer them, because I no longer trusted my own voice, because somewhere, deep within me, I feared they might be right. not in the sins they named, but in the choices I had made. When had I stepped from the path? When had I ceased to be the woman I once believed myself to be? Had it been when I first yielded to Edward? When I chose survival over obedience? When I learned to wield influence rather than endure power? Or had I never truly had a choice at all? The questions circled endlessly, offering no comfort. Then, through the chaos, a hand reached for me. Robert. His voice cut through the confusion, steady and real. Not a memory, not an echo, but present, alive. And in that moment, I remembered my daughters, Joan and Jane, Bella, John. They needed me. I could not abandon them to grief as I had nearly abandoned myself. I reached for him. At first, I could not quite grasp his hand. It seemed distant, unreal, slipping away even as I strained toward it. But then, his fingers closed around mine. Warm, solid, certain, and the spinning stopped. I was no longer lost in memory. I was Alice. Alive, the river moved past us. Gwen sat nearby, silent but watchful. I must see my daughters, I said, my voice strange to my own ears. Are Joan and Jane at Gaines? Robert nodded. They are safe, waiting for you. Relief flooded me. But first, he said gently, perhaps we should go to Barking Abbey. Bella is there. She may bring you comfort. Bella. My heart tightened with longing. Yes, I said. Take me to her. That simple decision grounded me. Before we reached the Abbey, I drew Edward's signet from my pouch. The weight of it in my hand felt heavier now, a symbol of everything I had been, and everything I had lost. I entrust this to you, I said, placing it in Robert's hand. He hesitated. Are you certain? I am, because I knew I could not carry it any longer. It belonged to the past, to Edward, to a life that had ended. At Barking, I went first to the chapel. The quiet embraced me, the scent of incense and candle wax, the soft glow of filtered light. It calmed something within me. For the first time since Edward's death, I could breathe. I knelt and prayed, not for forgiveness, not for absolution, but for release. Release from the hold Edward still had upon my heart. Release from the identity that bound me to him. Release to become something else. When Bella came to me, her cry pierced my heart. For father? She asked. For both, I said. We spoke quietly, remembered, grieved, and in her presence, I found strength. At Gaines, my home welcomed me with warmth. Joan and Jane ran to me, their arms around me, their laughter. It brought me back to life. For a time, I allowed myself to believe I could begin again. But peace did not last, because the world beyond Gaines had not forgotten me. Rumors reached us, accusations, threats, Parliament. They would not allow me to disappear quietly. When the summons came, I knew this was the reckoning. At Westminster, I stood alone, stripped of protection, stripped of power, stripped of voice. They accused me of everything: corruption, manipulation, witchcraft, even of weakening the king with my love. I was not permitted to speak, not to defend myself, not to explain, only to endure. Hours passed, days, and still they pressed on, seeking not truth, but condemnation. And they found it. My lands, taken. My wealth, seized. My jewels, confiscated. Even Edward's gifts, taken as though they meant nothing, and finally, exile. I was to be cast out, erased, destroyed, unless I accepted their condition. William Windsor. Marriage. Control. It was not a choice. It was a sentence. And they knew it. I felt the betrayal like a wound. Edward had known. He had planned this, or had been made to plan it. Even in his love, I had been a pawn. I wanted to refuse, to fight, to resist. But I thought of my daughters, of losing them, of never seeing them again. And I knew I would submit, not for myself, but for them. At the Mass, I confessed, not because I believed in their judgment, but because I had no power to resist it. I bowed my head, accepted their condemnation, and in doing so, I survived. But something within me died. Not love, not entirely, but trust, hope, the belief that I had ever been anything more than a tool. That night, I lay awake. Anger burned through me, not only at them, but at myself, for loving, for trusting, for believing. The chains had returned, heavier than before. And this time, there was no illusion to soften them, no Edward, no dream, only reality, and the knowledge that I must endure it. Chapter 19. I was granted a few days' grace at Westminster, and I used them as though they were the last moments of a life, already slipping from my grasp. The palace had once been a place of power for me, of influence, of whispered conversations, of doors that opened when I approached. Now it felt hollow, stripped of warmth, echoing with memories that had turned sharp and unwelcoming. I moved through its corridors as one might walk through a dream of the past, every step reminding me of what had been lost. I sent messages at once, to Bella, to Mary, to Robert. Each letter was written carefully, though my hand trembled as I wrote. Bella's was filled with reassurance, a promise that I would come to her soon, that all would not be as terrible as it seemed. For Mary, I wrote of practical matters, preparations for changes, instructions for the household, warnings that uncertainty lay ahead. But for Robert, I wrote my heart. It was the longest letter I had ever written and the most painful. I told him that I loved him, that nothing, not even what I was about to do, would change that truth. I explained, as best I could, that I had no choice, that this marriage was not a union, but a necessity, a means of remaining near my children, of preserving what little of my life I could still claim. I begged him not to interfere, not to challenge those who had arranged this fate for me, because I knew what would follow if he did. They would destroy him, and I could not bear that. When I sealed the letter, I pressed my hand over it for a long moment, as though I might somehow send part of myself with it. Lancaster came to see me. He was dressed in dark robes that emphasized both his authority and the fatigue etched upon his face. He spoke gently, even kindly, as if he believed his words might comfort me. "I would protect you," he said, his hand briefly touching my arm. The contact made my skin crawl. Protect me. The word had become a mockery. Protection in his world meant control. It meant decisions made without my consent, actions taken for reasons that suited him and others like him. It meant stripping me of autonomy while cloaking the act in benevolence. I did not challenge him. I did not dare. But inside, I raged. When he left, I dismissed the servant and paced the chamber like a caged creature. My anger, long suppressed, burst free. I cursed him, cursed the court, cursed the fate that had brought me here. I wept until my strength gave out, until I could do nothing but collapse into stillness. Let them whisper that I had gone mad. It mattered little. Madness seemed preferable to the clarity of my situation. The servants had changed. Once they had looked to me for guidance, sought my favor, listened to my words with attention. Now they avoided my gaze, answered only when required, and treated me with a cold indifference that cut deeper than open hostility. Even the small comforts of life were denied me. Food less plentiful, fires poorly tended, the warmth of the chambers diminished. It was a subtle punishment, but an effective one. Gwen remained my only constant. She fussed over me, scolded me gently for not eating, wrapped my hands in cloth when they grew too cold. "I almost preferred your anger," she said once. I tried to smile. "Perhaps it will return," I replied, but I knew it would not. Anger required energy, and I was beginning to feel only exhaustion. When William sent for me, I refused. I pleaded illness, claiming a headache too severe to allow me to leave my chamber. It was a small act of defiance, and I knew it would not last. He would have me soon enough. Joan came. She brought gifts, fine things, beautiful things, as though they might soften what lay ahead. Her presence was both comfort and torment. She spoke kindly, insisted she had not known of the arrangement until shortly before I had. I wanted to believe her. Perhaps I did, but belief changed nothing. I cannot marry him, I told her. You must, she replied gently. Her reasoning was sound. Marriage meant proximity to my children, security of a sort, an alternative to exile. It was the better of two terrible choices, but it was still a choice I had not made. The wedding was quiet, too quiet. No celebration, no joy, only the solemn repetition of words that bound me to a man I did not love. I wore gold. He wore indigo. We stood before the Archbishop and spoke the vows that would define the rest of my life. I felt nothing, not even grief, only a numb acceptance. William's house surprised me. It was not the crude dwelling I had expected, but a place of moderate comfort, newly built, well kept. It might have been pleasant under other circumstances, but I saw it for what it was, a place of confinement. That first night revealed much. He drank heavily, spoke of past slights, grievances long held. His bitterness was deep, his resentment evident. He listed my offenses as though they justified everything that had been done to me. I listened, said little. There was nothing to be gained by argument. When he finally slept, I lay awake, staring into darkness. I wondered how I might survive this. In the morning, he was different, gentler, more controlled. He spoke of apologies, of rebuilding, of making our marriage work. I listened again, and this time I agreed, in principle, because agreement cost me nothing, and resistance might cost me everything. The days that followed were a careful performance, courtesy, restraint, observation. I learned quickly when to speak and when to remain silent, when to yield and when to stand firm. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant attention. At Gaines, the arrival was difficult. My children were confused, uncertain how to receive this new arrangement. William, to his credit, attempted charm, exaggerating his courtesy until it became almost absurd. Their laughter eased some of the tension. For that, I was grateful. Robert was another matter. The look on his face when he saw me with William was something I would never forget. Pain, betrayal, restraint, all held tightly beneath the surface. I could not meet his eyes. Not at first. When we finally spoke alone, everything that had been held back broke free. I have chosen you, I told him. And it was true, even now. But choice had been taken from me. His response was measured, controlled, but filled with sorrow. I cannot share you, he said. The words struck deeply, but I understood. Still, we found a way. When William was absent, we would be together. It was not what we had hoped for, but it was something. And for a time, it was enough. Life settled into a fragile rhythm. William's moods shifted unpredictably. At times he was almost pleasant. At others, cruel, cutting, impossible to appease. I learned to endure him, to navigate his temper, to survive. Yet it was Robert who sustained me. His presence, his steadiness, his quiet understanding. These were the things that kept me whole. When my lands were restored, but given to William, something within me hardened. I had done everything required, sacrificed everything asked, and still, I was denied. That was the moment I changed. Not outwardly, not visibly, but within. I stopped expecting fairness, stopped hoping for justice, stopped believing that anyone would act in my interest but myself. From that moment forward, I would survive, not as a pawn, not as a victim, but as something else, something stronger, because I had no other choice. Chapter 20. William departed shortly after that bitter night, and his absence left behind a silence that was not peace, but tension held tightly in check. Even while he remained beneath my roof, I had lived as though walking across thin ice, listening for the crack that would signal its breaking. I watched him constantly, measuring every word, every glance, every shift in his mood, certain that he must know, must suspect, the truth of Robert and me. It seemed to me that if he possessed that knowledge, he would not hesitate to use it, to crush what little happiness I had salvaged from the wreckage of my life. And so, I waited. For accusation, for confrontation, for destruction. But none came. Instead, he left, carrying his resentment with him, like armor polished to a blinding sheen. Yet his absence did not bring relief, only new fears. I turned my thoughts to my son, John. Something had shifted between us, something I could not yet name. He visited less frequently, wrote less often, and when he did, his words felt careful, measured, as though he chose them with caution. I questioned William about it before he left, though I knew how futile it would be. If John wished you to know his thoughts, he would tell you, William said coldly. It was an answer designed not to comfort, but to wound, and it succeeded. After he departed, I resolved to leave as well. Gaines called to me. It had always been my refuge, a place where I could breathe, where the air felt lighter and the world less burdened by judgment. I told myself that there, surrounded by the land I loved, I might think clearly again. The preparations consumed us. Chests were packed, furnishings secured, servants directed in their duties. The bustle of movement kept my mind occupied, gave me purpose, even if only temporary. Yet, even amidst the chaos, something felt wrong. Mary, my daughter-in-law, who had always been quick to assert herself, to demand attention, to create disorder where there had been none, now moved quietly through the household. She neither complained nor interfered, neither sought advantage nor created difficulty. It was unnatural, and therefore dangerous. The answer came swiftly. A messenger from Henry Percy arrived, armed and cautious, as though expecting hostility. He delivered this message with the careful neutrality of a man who knew he carried unwelcome news. Mary had appealed to the Pope for an annulment. The words struck me with a force that left me momentarily unable to speak. "What are the accusations?" I asked. He claimed ignorance, but I saw the truth in his unease. Mary was being withdrawn from my household, removed before the matter could be decided, as though her continued presence might somehow taint the proceedings. It was a calculated move. Henry Percy was no fool. He had arranged this carefully, ensuring that William was absent, that I stood alone, that no defense I might mount could disrupt his plans. When Mary entered the hall, she wore her finest gown, her expression composed and self-satisfied. I despised her in that moment. "Praise God that my family is relieved of this canker," I murmured, too low for others to hear. "And I am relieved of a whore's son," she replied. "A king's son," I corrected. She left without regret, and none in my household mourned her departure. Even Jane, who had watched silently, sighed in relief. It was a small comfort, but it did not last, because I knew this was only the beginning. When the accusations were revealed, they cut deeply, that John was not of noble birth, that he was unworthy, that she would not bear children by him. The insult was deliberate, cruel, and effective, yet my son came to me. He stood before me taller, stronger, bearing the unmistakable marks of his father. His presence, his pride, his intensity, And still, he was wounded. "I will protest," he said. I saw the fire in him, the need to reclaim what had been taken. But I also saw, the danger, honor drove him. But honor, I had learned, could destroy as easily as it could elevate. He spoke of joining Lancaster, of proving himself, and in that moment, I understood. He was no longer a boy. He was a man seeking his place in a world that would not easily grant it. Yet beneath his words, I sensed something else. Secrecy. When I pressed him, the truth came slowly. He had seen William. Not once, but many times. The betrayal struck me like a physical blow, not because of William, but because of John. Because he had kept it from me. Because he had believed William's words. That I might be jealous. That I was not welcome. That I could not be trusted. I hid my pain. Because I could not afford to lose him. But the damage was done. The bond between us, strained, not broken, but no longer certain. And then, the worst came. William's lies. That Joan and Jane were not Edward's daughters. That I had betrayed their father. For a moment, I could not breathe. It was not the insult, but the possibility that John might believe it. I denied it fiercely, because it was the truth, because it mattered, because I had so little left to defend. He believed me, but doubt, once planted, never fully dies. Time passed. John left for war, and I watched him go with a mother's fear, knowing that the world he entered was one that devoured men like him, young, proud, eager to prove themselves. When news of his actions reached me, of the mutiny, I felt both pride and terror. He had led. He had dared. He had nearly destroyed himself. And for what? Honor. Always honor. But honor had taken too much already. Then, the final blow. The storm. The ship. The silence. No word. No sign. No hope. I waited. Prayed. Dreamed of impossible rescues. Refused to believe. Until belief was no longer possible. He was gone. My son. My beautiful, beloved boy. Lost to the sea. The grief consumed me. Not sharp. Not sudden. But endless. A hollow ache that filled every moment, every breath, every thought. I blamed William. I blamed myself. I blamed fate. Because someone had to bear the weight of it. Even as I knew, nothing would bring him back. When William came to beg forgiveness, I could not give it. But that it had been you? I said. And I meant it. Because he still lived. And John did not. Time passed. Slowly. Painfully. And then, William fell ill. This time, he did not recover. I nursed him. Because it was expected. Because it was right. But not because I loved him. When he died, the house breathed again. Not in joy, but in release. Yet even in that moment, he found a way to wound me. The will he had shown me, gone. Replaced by the old one. Everything left to his nephew. All my efforts, all my sacrifices, undone. That was the final betrayal. And yet, it was no longer enough to break me. Because I had already been broken. Instead, it hardened me. I would fight. Not for love, not for honor, but for survival. For my daughters. For what remained of my life. And slowly, very slowly, I began to let go. Of Edward. Of William. Of John. Not forgetting, never forgetting. But releasing the hold they had upon me. Because I understood at last. I must live. Not for the past, but for what remained. And in that understanding, I found something unexpected. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. And for the first time, it belonged only to me. Chapter 21. Widowed a third time, though in truth it was Edward whose loss had carved the deepest wound within me, I found myself, at the 42 years of age, standing at a threshold I had never expected to reach. Freedom. The word itself felt strange upon my thoughts, as though it belonged to someone else, some other woman who had lived a quieter, less complicated life. And yet, as I looked back upon the years that had shaped me, I could not deny that I had come, at last, to a place where I might choose for myself. For the first time, I counted those years not in numbers alone, but in the weight of memory. Janin, 4 years, 2 of them touched by happiness so pure that even now I could recall the warmth of it. As Edward, 15 years, a tapestry of light and shadow, of love and loss, of power and vulnerability, of moments that had lifted me beyond myself and others that had broken me. William, 7 years of endurance, of bitterness, of a marriage forged not from affection, but from necessity, and sustained only by the quiet strength I drew from elsewhere. From Robert, and yet I could not lay all blame upon those who had passed through my life. I had been shaped not only by their actions, but by my own. My passions, my ambitions, my fears. I had sought security in lands and wealth, believing them to be the foundation of a stable life. I had underestimated the importance of alliances, true alliances, built not on advantage, but on trust, and I had failed my son. That knowledge lingered. Even as I turned my gaze toward the future, it remained a shadow at the edge of my thoughts, but I would not allow it to consume me. Instead, I chose to begin again. That winter, I gave myself wholly to my daughters. Joan and Jane were no longer children, though they would always be so in my heart. 14 and 13. They stood on the cusp of womanhood, their laughter bright, their spirits unbroken by the storms that had shaped my life. I cherished every moment with them. We spent long afternoons together, turning the rich fabrics of gowns I no longer wore into garments suited to their youth. Lighter, more playful, filled with movement and color. Their delight in these small transformations filled me with a quiet joy I had not known for years. Bella came often. Her presence was a comfort, steady and thoughtful. She moved through the house with a calm assurance, her faith guiding her in ways I both admired and envied. Her abbess, she told me, was a woman of kindness, and I found myself grateful that Bella's path had led her to such a place. My daughters became my salvation. In their laughter, I found light. In their affection, I found purpose. How could I regret anything that had led to them? Even as I dressed in dark colors, honoring the memory of those I had lost, I allowed myself small indulgences. Silk headdresses, carefully arranged, pearls and gems that caught the light, gowns cut to flatter rather than conceal. I played my part, the lady of the manor, the benefactress, the woman who had survived, and those who came to visit saw only that. Robert and I remained cautious at first. Our love had grown in the shadows, nurtured in secrecy, protected by necessity. It felt strange, almost daring to imagine it existing openly without fear. But time changed that, and so did Geoffrey. He came often, sometimes alone, his presence as familiar as it was welcome. There was a distance between him and Pippa now, though he spoke of it with a shrug, as though it were simply another fact of life. "It is as it is," he said. I winced at the words. Edward had said the same. Geoffrey noticed, apologized, but I assured him there was no need. His friendship was a gift I did not take lightly. In the quiet hours of the evening, after the household had settled, we would sit together and talk. Or rather, I would speak, and he would listen. I told him everything, my loves, my regrets, my fears, and in return, he gave me understanding. He spoke of his work, of the stories he shaped from the lives around him, of Crusade, and how he had come to see her not as a figure of scorn, but as a woman caught in circumstances beyond her control. "As you were," he said. I did not answer, but I knew he was right. When spring came, we returned to Gaines. The land welcomed us. Freshly turned earth, the scent of growth, the promise of renewal. It was a world far removed from the intrigue and cruelty of court. One afternoon, Robert took me riding. We followed the river, the water moving gently beside us, until we came to a meadow where a fallen tree offered a place to rest. There, he took my hands, and everything changed. "My love," he said, "it is time." I felt a moment of fear, not of him, but of hope, and then relief. "Yes," I said, "with all my heart." We sealed our vows not with ceremony, but with love. Simple, honest, unguarded. For the first time in my life, I felt no need to hide, no fear of consequence, only the certainty that I had chosen, and been chosen in return. My daughters accepted him with warmth and humor. Jane, thoughtful as ever, gave her blessing. Joan, ever bold, teased him with playful affection. And so, we became a family. Our wedding was small, intimate, perfect. At Upminster, with Dom Henai to witness our vows, we stood together not as pawns in a greater game, but as equals, bound by choice rather than necessity. The months that followed were filled with quiet happiness. We built a garden, not merely of flowers, but of memory. Tomasa's influence lived in every path, every bed, every carefully chosen plant. Jane took to it with enthusiasm, her hands always in the soil, her mind full of plans. Joan found her own path. A young lawyer, Robert Skern, captured her interest. I watched them together and saw the beginnings of something real, something I hoped would bring her the happiness I had found so late. And then, another blessing. I was with child. At my age, I had not expected it, but I welcomed it. With joy, Agnes Joanna was born in winter, a child of light, a reminder that life continued, even after loss. A year later, Jeffrey followed. My son, named for my dear friend, who delighted in the boy beyond measure. For a time, I believed I had been granted everything I had lost. But life does not grant such gifts without cost. Jeffrey did not live to manhood. His death was a quiet devastation. One more loss. One more lesson in the fragility of joy. Yet even in grief, I did not break. I had learned. I had endured. And I continued. My daughters married, built lives of their own, found happiness in ways I could only guide, not control. And I, at last, found peace. Not the absence of pain, but the acceptance of it. I wrote my story, not for the world, but for my children, so they would know the truth, not the gossip, not the judgment, but the woman I had been, and the woman I had become. Sometimes, in the early morning, as Robert and I walked with our hawks, I felt the presence of the past, Edward's laughter, Janet's warmth, even William's shadow. They were part of me, but they no longer defined me. I wore red and pearls, not for them, but for myself, because I had survived, and in surviving, I had finally learned how to live. If this story touched your heart and stayed with you until the very end, please support us with a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and unforgettable stories like this. Your support truly means the world to us.